Okay, I'll get started this morning by just officially welcoming all of you guys. Sawadee Kap, Sawadee Kap. Welcome to all of you guys. Welcome to Wat Tung. This is what we call our Pali Canon and English study group, where each Saturday we get together and we study the original teachings of the Buddha. Oftentimes students will come into this program after they've learned some other teachings in other places and our various foundational programs and courses and retreats. But if this is your first time here, no worries, you're going to actually be able to learn today. But just understand that today is a bit different than our traditional study, where traditionally a teacher is just teaching you and teaching you and teaching you and helping you learn the teachings of the Buddha to build a foundation. And then we open up for questions probably about every 20 or 30 minutes or so. Where this program, the way that we do it is we start out with a meditation, and I help you guys to develop your meditation practice by guiding you in a meditation. Then we transition into learning, and as we're learning, I invite a student to volunteer individually each time we progress forward in this book. Volume 10, chapters 41 through 46 is what we're studying today, and a student will typically read that chapter, and it's sometimes just a paragraph or two, and someone will volunteer to read that either here at the temple, or those of you guys online, you're welcome to read as well. And then after a student reads a particular chapter, then I will share about 5 or 10 minutes of teachings on that particular chapter, and then I open up to any questions you guys have. So our foundational programs are kind of like a bachelor's, master's degree in Buddhist studies, where you're being guided very closely and helping you to develop your foundation on the path to enlightenment. And then this program is kind of more like a PhD program, where you're doing a lot of independent study on your own, and you're coming to class in order to seek guidance with the teacher. So again, if this is your first time in this program, it's okay. You'll still be able to learn. There's plenty of people who come here and this is their first time, but I just share this at the beginning to help you understand that this isn't the traditional way that a student would start their journey on the path to enlightenment in this particular style of learning and teaching, but that's okay because you're still going to be able to learn. You'll see how it goes. So once again, welcome to all of you guys. Welcome to all of you guys online that are joining us. I'll invite you guys to join for meditation. We're going to start with breathing mindfulness meditation. This is a primary form of training that the Buddha used in addition to everything else in order to move his mind to enlightenment. So I'll guide you guys in this meditation first by helping you understand the body positioning. Typically, when you're meditating, you're either in the seated, lying, standing, or walking positions. These are 4 positions that the Buddha taught. It's common to learn in the seated position, either seated on the floor or seated in a chair or somewhere else. If you're on the floor, you might just have your legs lightly crossed. This will allow the circulation to flow in the lower body. Some people like to put their legs off the mat, or they'll have multiple cushions under their rear. This gets the hips up in the air, and it lessens the angle at the hips, the knees, and the ankles, and allows that circulation to flow. And if you decide you'd like to sit in a chair, some people like to put their feet flat on the floor or cross at the ankles. It's not about everybody doing it exactly the same way. It's about finding what's comfortable for you, because each person's body is a little bit different. So you find what's comfortable for you, whether you're on the floor or you're in a chair, or any other way that you might be positioning the body. The hands and the arms, the Buddha put his right hand over his left with his thumbs together, and he put this into his lap. And again, if this is comfortable for you, you could use this, but not everybody's going to necessarily find that comfortable. So there's other options as well. Some people like to put their palms on their thighs or on their knees. Some people put their palms up. These are all options that you might consider and see what works best for you. The upper body should be erect. This keeps the mind attentive and alert during the meditation, whereas if you're slouched, the mind will have a tendency to be dull or lethargic. But if you are real rigid, the mind would have a tendency to be overactive and uptight. So you'd like the upper body to be in the middle, where it's erect, to keep the mind attentive and alert during the meditation. I'm going to ease us into meditation with some chanting. This will just help to ease the mind into meditation, helping to bring some awareness to the mind and to the breath. And if you'd like to join in these chants, they're on a laminated sheet over there on the table. You can see the chants because they're in the original Pali language. This is the original language of the teachings of the Buddha. And there's the English translations on there as well, so you can see what the English translations are. The Buddha during his lifetime used chanting to help his students commit the teachings to memory because everything that he taught was oral. So he used chanting once every 2 weeks to help his students recite his teachings word for word, and then they would commit them to memory because they didn't have books and YouTube and podcasts and things like this 2,500 years ago. So they just recited his teachings every 2 weeks as a way to commit them to memory and be able to then practice them. So these chants that we use, they're not a rite or ritual or a ceremony or worship. It's not prayer or anything like that. It really is just nowadays to help ease into meditation and get more benefit out of the meditation itself. And you'll even see that the chants show a lot of respect and gratitude for the Buddha, a lot of appreciation. So I suspect that his students either created them during his life or after his death, because a Buddha doesn't walk around teaching people to chant things to him to honor and respect him. A Buddha would have eliminated their ego. They would have dissolved any boastfulness or arrogance. So they don't walk around teaching people to do those kinds of things. But if you learn from a teacher how to move from this unenlightened mind where you're experiencing sadness, anger, frustration, irritation, annoyance, guilt, shame, fear, boredom, loneliness, shyness, resentment, jealousy, all these displeasures in the mind. If you learn from a teacher who helped you go from that to completely experiencing peace and joy for the rest of your life, and that teacher didn't want anything from you or expect anything from you, you'd probably have a lot of respect for that person too, and a lot of appreciation. So this is what the students, I suspect, did either during his life or after his death, created these chants as a way to honor and respect him for the work that he did to help them move to this enlightened mental state. So I'm going to ease you into meditation with this chanting. And as I said, you're welcome to join along if you like. And then after the chanting, I'll provide some guidance where during the meditation, you'll actually be guided in how to do the meditation. But then there's going to be a period of time where I won't be talking at all and everyone will just be meditating together. Those of you guys here and those of you guys online will just all be meditating. And then after the meditation, we'll come out of that with some more chanting. And then from there, we'll move into some teaching. So if you guys need more cushions or you need the chanting sheet, you're welcome to get up and get that at any point. I'll go ahead and get started with the chanting and then provide you guys some guidance. Arahang Samma Sambuddho Mahakewa Wat Tung Mahakewanang Apiwateyami Savakato Mahakewata Dhammo Dhammang Namasami Supatipano Mahakewato Sawaka Sangho Sanghang Namami Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Iti piso Mahakewa Arahang Samma Sambuddho Vicacaranang Sammuno Sakato Rokavitu สติสัตตาตาวามานุสนังโอโตภาควาติ Okay, with the lower body and hands and arms comfortable, and the upper body erect, just close the eyes and start breathing in through the nose and out through the nose. Here you're just looking to establish the breath, a nice, natural, steady, consistent breath. Not forced or controlled, just a gradual inhale through the nose, experiencing the full breath. And then when you're ready, exhale out through the nose. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. Your breath may not match up with the guidance that I'm providing, and that's okay. This is your practice. I'm just here for guidance. You can use this voice as a reminder that whenever you get to the next inhale, breathe in gradually through the nose, experiencing the full breath, developing a nice, natural, steady, consistent breath. And then, whenever you're ready, exhale out through the nose. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. Once the breath is well established, start fixating the mind on the breath, either the sound of the breath coming into the nose or the sensation of air moving over the skin into the nose. The breath is the present moment. Fixate the mind on the breath, the present moment. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. With the mind fixated on the breath, whenever you notice that it moves off the breath, cut that off, let it go, and come back to the breath, the present moment. No need to observe the thought, label it, judge it, analyze it, or even try to figure out where it's coming from. Whenever you notice that the mind is moved off the breath, cut that off, let it go, and come back to the breath, the present moment. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. I'm going to be quiet now and let you do this work of focusing on the breath, cutting off and letting go anytime the mind moves off the breath. You have nowhere to go. There's nothing to do. No one needs you right now. This is your time to focus on the breath. Breathing in and out. ระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธมหาเกวาพุทธังมหาเกวันหังอภิวาเทมิสวากขาโตมหาเกวตาธัมโมธัมมังนามาสามิสุปฏิปันโนมหาเกวโตสาวกสังโฆสังฆังนามามินับโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนับโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนับโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะอิติปิโสมะคะวะอะระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธวิจาจารณังสัมมุโนสคาโตโรกาวิตุอนุเตโรปุริสานามาสติสัตตาตาวามนุสนังพุทโธภะคะวะติ Okay, if you guys would like to slowly make your way out of meditation, I will once again welcome all of you guys, including those of you guys that joined us since we started meditating. Welcome to all of you guys. Welcome to Wat Tung. Those of you guys that are here and those of you guys that are online, welcome to everyone. If this is your first time here, I would like to just help you to get acquainted with the space a little bit. In the back of the room on the right, there's a bathroom that you're welcome to use at any time. Feel free to get up and use the restroom if you need to use that. There's even restrooms outside the classroom. If you go outside and follow the signs, there's the main bathrooms for the temples are out there. We even have water here if you'd like to help yourself to any water. There's students who provide this water for you guys to enjoy, so feel free to help yourself to any water that you like. This meditation that we just did, this is called breathing mindfulness meditation, and this is part of the training on the path to enlightenment. What enlightenment is where you train your mind to be peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy, no longer experiencing any discontent feelings. By the time you get to enlightenment, you will no longer experience any anger, sadness, frustration, irritation, annoyance, guilt, shame, fear, boredom, loneliness, shyness, resentment, jealousy, even the slightest displeasure is eliminated from the enlightened mind. You're not even in a bad mood anymore. You'll notice that your personal and professional relationships will blossom. You'll experience this ability to have harmonious relationships with anybody and everybody around you. You'll notice that there's focus, concentration, clarity, and deep memory in the mind. And where this comes from is that the Buddha discovered 10 individual pollutions in the mind. These are referred to as the 10 fetters. And when you eliminate these 10 fetters out of the mind through training the mind, you'll notice this brightness and this radiance of the enlightened mind shine through. So there's meditation that is part of the training, but there's other teachings that you would need as well. So in this classroom, in this programs that I teach here and also online as well, I help students to develop a foundation on the path to enlightenment, essentially building this framework to understand the path to enlightenment. And then there's programs like this, the Pali Canon and English Study Group, that fills in that framework and helps you to further understand all the teachings that you'll need to be able to move the mind to this enlightened mental state. So today what we're doing is we're studying volume 10, chapters 41 through 46. This is the last part of this particular book before we move into the next book. This is a 13-volume book series that I use to guide all of our programs. All the foundational programs, we use volume 1 of the book series. And then in a program like this, we use volumes 2 through 13. And the foundational programs, you can take courses and retreats that are 5 days long or something like this. There's even the group learning program, which is a 7-month program that helps you to learn, each Sunday and Wednesday, little by little over the course of 7 months. And then there's a program like this that meets every Saturday, and that is a 1.5-year program, and helps you to really fill in the framework to understanding the teachings of the Buddha. Because meditation is part of the training, but you wouldn't be able to meditate your way to enlightenment. You wouldn't be able to just do meditation and that's it. But you also wouldn't be able to get to enlightenment without meditation either. You're going to need meditation to help you get to enlightenment. So as you were meditating, if you notice that your mind was bombarded with thoughts, or you indulged in a thought and you kind of followed that for a period of time before you realized you were meditating, and then you brought your mind back to the breath, this is completely normal when you're first starting to meditate, that you can notice this bombardment of thoughts or an indulging of a thought, and you kind of follow it for a period of time before you realize you need to bring the mind back to the breath. You're not bad at meditation. You haven't done anything wrong. It's just what the unenlightened mind does, that when it's untrained and undisciplined, it will have a bombardment of thoughts oftentimes, or you'll follow a thought for a period of time, maybe 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and then you realize, oh yeah, I'm meditating. Let me bring my mind back to the breath. By the time you get to enlightenment, not only is the mind peaceful and joyful throughout your day, but in meditation, you experience peace and joy all the way through the meditation. But you'll still have occasional thoughts in the meditation. The goal of the meditation isn't to eliminate your thoughts. Sometimes people think that when they're learning and they're hearing the instruction to cut off your thoughts and bring the mind back to the breath. You're not trying to eliminate your thoughts. What you're doing is you're developing mindfulness or awareness of the mind. So when you do have a thought, you know that you had a thought. And then you have this concentration to be able to focus on the breath and have that focus and clarity while you're on the breath. And then when the mind moves off the breath, which it will do even when you're in the enlightened mental state, it'll occasionally move off the breath. You can notice that with your mindfulness that it's moved off the breath, and then you can cut it off and let it go and bring the mind back, essentially gaining this discipline or this control of the mind. So that now in daily life, when you're noticing unwholesome thoughts coming up, or you're noticing anger or sadness or frustration, these other discontent feelings arising, you'll notice it with your mindfulness if you've cultivated that in meditation. And then with the ability to easily let go, having discipline of the mind, you can train the mind to cut off the anger or cut off the frustration and bring the mind back so that you no longer need to experience the anger and frustration, the fear, the resentment, the hostility, the jealousy, all these discontent feelings that arise. Eventually, you eliminate all the causes and conditions, those pollutions. Eventually, you eliminate the causes and conditions that are causing these discontent feelings to arise, and then you won't even experience the arising of anger. By the time you get to enlightenment, it's physically impossible for an enlightened being to experience anger or frustration or any of those other discontent feelings. And that's because they've uprooted the causes and conditions that are causing it. So one of the things you're doing on the path to enlightenment is you're learning about these causes and conditions. You're learning about the teachings that are the Buddha is explaining the mind and how the mind functions, and he's explaining the natural world around you. I refer to these as the natural laws of existence. And when you're learning the teachings of the Buddha, It's not about believing a bunch of things and then hoping something good happens when you die. That's not what he did. Instead, you're learning teachings, you're investigating them, you're examining them, looking to understand them, and then you're reflecting on those teachings to independently verify whether they're true or whether they're false. And then you're practicing the teachings. And through practicing, that's where you're transforming the mind, you're uprooting the pollutions, and getting to the point where the mind starts experiencing more and more peace and more joy. The enlightened mental state, it's not like a light switch where it's either on or off. The qualities of enlightenment start to shine through more and more as you're eliminating the pollutions. So you'll notice that as you're learning and practicing these teachings, that peace and joy and those other qualities that I mentioned about enlightenment will start gradually shining through the mind more and more. You'll notice that as the pollutions are lifting, you'll start noticing more peace and more joy coming through the mind. And this is the gradual training, gradual practice, and gradual progress of the path to enlightenment. The Buddha didn't sit under a tree, meditate, and instantly get to enlightenment. This is oftentimes what people are led to think, but when you learn his original teachings, he shares with you about this gradual training, gradual practice, and gradual progress. So because an individual is learning now, they're investigating the teachings now, they're reflecting now, and they're practicing the teachings now, they see the results now in this life, that you'll see the mind becoming more peaceful and more joyful as you're training the mind. So this is just a little bit of background for you on what enlightenment is and kind of the progress to enlightenment. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to transition over to the Pali Canon and English study group, where I'll invite you guys here at the temple and those of you guys online in Zoom, if you would like to read one of the chapters that I'm going to be sharing today, you're welcome to read that. If you're here at the temple, we have microphones in the white bowl there by the camera that you can just get one of those and turn on the microphone, and then you can read the particular chapter. And then after someone reads the chapter, I will share some teachings on that and then open up to any questions you guys have. If you're in Zoom, if you'd like to volunteer to read, you can just electronically raise your hand and I'll be able to see that. And then as we get to the question period, as you would like to ask questions here at the temple, if you wouldn't mind using the microphone, that would be helpful, because then the people online will be able to hear you. And those of you guys online, if you're in Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, you can either put your question into the comment section and I'll be able to see that, or in Zoom, you can electronically raise your hand and ask any questions or follow-up questions directly. So let's get here to the first chapter. This is chapter 41. We're in volume 10. We're almost actually finished with this program, and people join this program at different times. It's not like you only need to join at the beginning. Students will join at different times throughout the year and a half, and then we repeat this program over and over and over again. Same thing with the group learning program, the 7-month program that's more of a foundation. People join that at any point, and then we repeat that over and over as we go. And then we have various courses and retreats that we share throughout the month and throughout the year as well. So if there's someone here or online that would like to volunteer to read this particular chapter, you can read this. Let me switch over here so the folks online can see the visual aids. Okay, now everybody should be able to see it, both online and here at the temple. Is there someone that would like to volunteer to read this chapter? Yes, sir.
Wisdom, mindfulness, and name and form stopped by the stopping of consciousness. Wisdom and mindfulness, said Venerable Ajita, and name and form. Sir, tell me this when asked, where is this stopped?
What happened? The battery ran out? Yeah, okay. There's some more batteries there if you guys would like to switch them around.
Let's see where. Tell me this when asked, where is this stopped? I shall answer this question which you have asked, Ajita. Where name and form is completely stopped by the stopping of consciousness, there it is stopped.
Okay, so for some of you guys that have never learned the teachings of the Buddha, this is coming in really at the tail end of this program, where there's volume 10, chapter 41. So this particular teaching here, it needs an understanding of other teachings of the Buddha. And then in our last class, we actually studied that particular teaching that you would need in order to understand this one. I'm going back to chapter 40, which is what we studied last class. This is called dependent origination as the law of nature. This is the highest teaching of the Buddha. This explains exactly why your mind experiences discontentedness and how you continually experience rebirth over and over and over again. And oftentimes students need foundation and learning to be able to get up to this point, to be able to actually learn this particular teaching. But this is where the Buddha shows you the cause and effect of what's actually leading to your discontent feelings and why you keep experiencing rebirth over and over. And remember, nothing in the teachings of the Buddha is to be believed. So what you do is you learn a teaching like this, you reflect on it, and then you practice it, and then you can independently verify that it's true. So what I'm going to do is just give you guys a brief little introduction to this, but you guys can ask questions as you like, because understanding this is what's going to help you to understand the next teaching, the one that Josh just read. So here, dependent origination, there's 12 interlinking steps or causes or conditions that are showing you how one thing leads to the other, that leads to the other. So the Buddha is saying here that ignorance, or this unknowing of true reality, which means the mind just doesn't understand what it doesn't understand. It has this lack of wisdom in the unenlightened state, that's the start of this, that as we're born into the world, that we don't have certain wisdom about the world. We don't understand the natural laws of existence. We don't understand things like the three universal truths, the four noble truths, the eightfold path, the five precepts, the wisdom of the natural law of karma, of cause and effect, or action and result. There's all these things that the mind just doesn't understand. This is called ignorance. Well, we're using that word ignorance today, but that tends to be kind of a derogatory term. So we're translating words from what the Buddha used into modern day language. So I tend to use this phrase unknowing of true reality, because this is like confusion or misunderstanding. That's what the mind is starting out with. And because of that misunderstanding or that lack of wisdom, that confusion, there's certain volitional formations. These are choices and decisions that an individual makes. When you make unwise decisions, it's going to produce unwholesome results for you. When you make wise decisions, it's going to produce wholesome results for you. But as long as you have this ignorance or this unknowing of true reality, you're naturally going to make unwise decisions that lead to unwholesome results. So while you're cultivating wisdom on this path to enlightenment, you're learning, you're reflecting to independently verify, and then you're practicing. And that's how you're cultivating wisdom. So as long as there's this ignorance as condition, then there's these volitional formations or these choices and decisions that are going to be made through that unknowing of true reality. Then with those choices and decisions that are unwise, then it's going to produce a consciousness, which is an actual mind. So the mind is going to spawn from that. Then that mind is then going to be the condition that then comes together with what's called name and form. This is what we're studying in this first chapter today. What name and form is essentially is this physical body. The Buddha gives a detailed description of what name and form is, but just for now, you might think of this as the physical body. That's what name and form is. So what he's describing is that as long as there's a consciousness, as long as there's a mind, it's going to find a physical body. And now these two things are going to come together. Once these two things come together with name and form as condition, then it's going to form what's called the six sense bases. The six sense bases are the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, the body itself, and then the mind. This is how the mind takes in contact. So when the mind comes in contact with something, the eye sees a physical form, the ear hears a sound, the nose smells an odor, the tongue tastes a flavor, the body comes in contact with a physical object, and then there's mental objects that the mind interacts with. So certain thoughts, certain thinking that the mind has. These are called the six sense bases. So those get formed when the consciousness and the body come together. Now an individual is going to form these six sense bases. And now with the six sense bases as condition, then there's going to be this contact. There's contact coming through these six sense bases like a doorway. The six sense bases are a doorway of content coming into the mind. And now when you experience that contact, then you're going to experience a certain feeling, either a pleasant feeling, a painful feeling, or a feeling that is neither painful nor pleasant. These are called conditioned feelings, that you're experiencing some feeling based on a condition. So maybe you wake up in the morning and you see that it's sunny outside, and now you get happy and excited based on seeing the sun. But now when you see the rain, that's something else that you're seeing. Now you're going to experience the painful feelings, maybe sad or frustrated. Or you see your bank account is one balance, you might get pleasant feelings, you might get happy or excited. But then when your bank account changes maybe to a lower balance, maybe you get frustrated or angry. That's because of the contact that's coming through the mind. You're now experiencing this contact. And then this allows the feelings to arise because there's what's called craving in the mind. What craving is this is the longing and yearning, the mind chasing after the objects of its affection, wanting things to be a certain way. The mind has certain things in the unenlightened state that it sees as agreeable. And then when you get that contact with that agreeable thing, then you'll experience pleasant feelings. But when you have contact with disagreeable things based on your cravings, then you will get the painful feelings. So if $5,000 is agreeable to you in your bank account, when you see that, you'll get the pleasant feelings. But if $2,000 is disagreeable to you, you'll get the painful feelings when you see that. And there's other things you can do. You can use these same examples with the ears, nose, tongue, body, and the mind itself. So let's use the ears. If you're driving down the street and you stop at a stoplight and there's someone next to you playing music that you really like, you might be like, yeah, all right, that's my music. Yeah, all right, let's go. All these pleasant feelings start arising, right? You get all happy, excited, but then you pull up to the next light, and based on your cravings, now you hear music that you don't like. Somebody else is sitting next to you in the car and you don't like this music based on your cravings. And now you get frustrated or angry or agitated. That's those feelings arising because you've had contact, and now there's certain cravings in the mind where you're longing and yearning for things to be permanently agreeable, but things can't be permanently agreeable because of the universal truth of impermanence. So now as the mind's experiencing that, it will then start clinging. It will want these pleasant feelings to be permanent, and it's not possible for these things to be permanent because everything around you is impermanent. Then this is going to produce existence, where now there's existence of a being, where this being is now born, experiencing birth. And if there's birth, there's going to be aging, death, sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair. This is how all of this discontentedness comes to be. That because of ignorance, this unknowing of true reality, there's these certain cravings that arise in the mind. And then because of these cravings, of the mind seeing things as agreeable or disagreeable, then there's going to be this discontentedness that is occurring. And this is a cycle that just keeps occurring over and over and over and over again. And this is why when you're learning on the path to enlightenment, you're guided to cultivate wisdom, because when you replace this ignorance with wisdom, now you've eliminated this sequence of events, these causes and conditions of one thing leading to the next. Because if ignorance is eliminated, then the decisions that you make can be wise, that you can have wise decisions that lead to wholesome results. And then you won't experience this continuous discontentedness, this continuous rebirth over and over. So that's why you're not guided to believe anything on the path, because with belief, you don't know what's true or false. But when you get to wisdom, you will have the truth. You will know what true reality is. Instead of having this unknowing of true reality, you will know true reality. And one of the first things you learn on the path to enlightenment through the Four Noble Truths is that your mind is causing its own discontent feelings. All the anger, sadness, frustration, fears, guilt, shame, all that discontent feelings, your mind is causing it itself. And when you understand that, then you understand the real problem, and you can independently verify that your mind is causing these feelings itself. Then you can actually fix it. You can use the tools and techniques that the Buddha shares to fix the problem. But as long as you don't know what the problem is, what the cause of that problem is, the elimination and the path forward, what the unenlightened mind will tend to do is you'll tend to push people away out of your life, thinking that that's going to solve the problem, but it doesn't, because that's not the problem. When you push people out of your life, you just get angry and bitter and harsh or agitated about something else. It's only a matter of time. If pushing that person out of your life solved the problem, you wouldn't get angry anymore. You'd be completely peaceful and joyful. Or if you falsely understand what the real problem is, you might be bitter and harsh and hostile towards somebody. And when you do that, then someone might choose to leave out of your life. Then the other thing that the unenlightened mind might do is put its expectations on people and try to control people to do things your way. And when these things are happening, you're pushing people away, you're being bitter and harsh and hostile, you're putting your expectations on people. The number of people you can spend time with becomes fewer and fewer and fewer. And you'll notice that this becomes more and more challenging to exist in the world harmoniously with all beings. So this is a really detailed teaching to walk you through what are the causes and conditions that are leading to this discontentedness. But the Four Noble Truths gives you kind of like a little window. It's usually like the first teaching you learn. This is usually a teaching that you learn after about a year and a half of learning. So if this is the first time you've seen this, and maybe part of it's making sense, maybe part of it's not, it's okay. But this is something that you will eventually start to learn, and you can dissect, and you can learn what each one of these things are and how they are indeed explaining the truth of why you keep experiencing discontentedness and why you keep experiencing rebirth over and over. So before I explain chapter 41, is there any questions on this at all? Anything here? Okay, let me just check online. Okay, so I'm not seeing any questions online either. So now let me explain to you guys this chapter 41 that Josh just read. So what Josh just read here is where this particular student is asking about wisdom and mindfulness in name and form. Tell me this when asked, where is this stopped? She's asking, where is name and form stopped? Where does it stop happening? Where do we stop picking up this physical form of the body? Essentially, where does rebirth stop? How do you end rebirth is what she's asking the Buddha. And then the Buddha says, I shall answer this question which you have asked, Ajita. Where name and form is completely stopped, by the stopping of consciousness, there it is stopped. So basically what he's saying is if there is no consciousness, then it won't come together with a name and form, and therefore name and form, which is the physical body, won't exist. So the way to stop this continuous cycle of rebirth is to stop consciousness from continuing to be spawned and produced in the world. And that dependent origination is showing you how to eliminate consciousness. The way you eliminate consciousness is by eliminating ignorance or the unknowing of true reality. Because if you eliminate ignorance, then you're not going to be making unwise decisions that allows craving, anger, and ignorance to continue to exist in the world. So therefore, you'll never get to a consciousness. So by eliminating all of these steps, this is how you eliminate the continuous picking up of the physical body. If you think about all the time and effort and energy that you put into this physical body, brushing your hair, combing your hair, getting a haircut, shaving, cleaning the body, brushing the teeth, defecating, urinating, cleaning up from that, feeding this body, clothing this body, doing all the things that we do to this body, the Buddha describes it as a burden to keep carrying around this body over and over and over again. And of course, it's helpful to look at the positive side of life, but he's helping you to see in other parts of his teachings how continuing to pick up this body over and over and over again in continuous rebirth is just leading to continuous exhaustion, perhaps, of continuing to have to maintain this physical body. So the way that you eliminate the picking up of this body is to eliminate the consciousness. What produces consciousness is the craving, desire, attachment. This here is showing you how consciousness comes into the world and how a being comes into the world. There's other teachings that the Buddha explains where craving, desire, attachment is the fuel that is causing rebirth. Just like a fire, if you have a fire burning, if you put logs onto this fire, these logs are the fuel. And as long as this fire has fuel, it's going to send off sparks into the air, and the wind's going to carry those sparks, and it's going to land, and now it's going to create a new fire. So as long as this original fire has fuel, it's going to send off sparks, and it's going to create new fires. So the fire in the mind is what we call craving, anger, and ignorance, or the unknowing of true reality. These are called the three fires. As long as these are burning in the mind and they have fuel, it's going to send off this spark that is then going to create this new consciousness. So craving, desire, attachment, wants, expectation, longing, yearning, this is the fire that's causing the spark that is then going to create the new consciousness. And you can see this for yourself because your mind, you can see it longing, yearning, and it's holding on to things. And when you get what you want, you get those pleasant feelings, but when you don't get what you want, you get those painful feelings. And if you've ever noticed anger, frustration, or agitation when it's arising, it feels kind of hot. It can make your chest feel hot, your face can feel hot. You can almost feel like your head's going to explode sometimes if you get really angry or really agitated or irate. This is that fire that's burning inside the mind that's causing that to arise. And that fire, as long as that craving is in there, it's going to produce a spark that then produces the next mind or the next consciousness. And now that consciousness is going to find a physical body to be able to come into this world. So as part of getting to enlightenment, not only is your mind getting to that peaceful, calm, serene, and content mind with joy, where your mind's permanently in that enlightened mental state, but also you're no longer going to experience rebirth because you've learned everything you need to learn in this world, and now you can escape this continuous cycle. But as long as there's things here that you haven't learned, and the mind is still holding on to this world, wanting things to be a certain way, longing and yearning, expecting things to be a certain way, your mind's still holding on to this world, it's going to keep coming back over and over and over again because it hasn't cultivated the wisdom that it needs to escape this whole cycle. So any questions on chapter 41 here? The Buddha is explaining that the elimination of consciousness is how to eliminate the taking up of this body over and over again. And it's wisdom and mindfulness that is going to help you to accomplish that. What wisdom is cultivating true reality and understanding true reality. And then mindfulness is awareness of the mind, having awareness of what's going on in the mind. These are certain qualities that you need to cultivate in order to get to enlightenment. Okay, no questions here? All right, I don't see any online either. Okay, so let's go to the next one, chapter 42. Is there someone who would like to read this one? Yes, please. Yeah, if you could use the mic, that way that people online can hear. By the way, what you have here in all of these books, and by the way, all these books are free. You can download them from our website. You can take them and go print them. You can get them here. There's printed versions, and you can even get them on Amazon if you'd like to get the printed versions. What you've got here is you've got the title of the chapter. You've got an excerpt because the Buddha's discourses are very long. And what this book series has done is it kind of pulls them out and puts an excerpt so that you can kind of get one or two or three golden nuggets in each one of these chapters. And then you can focus on that and kind of take off a small bite and then chew it and digest it rather than taking off a real big bite where maybe the Buddha's talking about 10 or 15 different things. You can just get kind of one or two or three golden nuggets. So these are the original words of the Buddha. But then you've got this reference here, which takes you back to the original source teachings, where you can go back to the original and see the long discourse if you like. Then you've got words from me to be able to help you reflect on this. And oftentimes I'm explaining to you how to use it in your practice and be able to support your continued growth. So you'll have these in the books. I always suggest students to start with volume 1, which is organized a bit different, which has more guidance to help you develop your practice with some words of the Buddha, where these books, volumes 2 through 13, are mainly the words of the Buddha with words from me to be able to help you reflect on this and implement it in your daily life. So yeah, if you'd like to read that one.
Without clinging, one attains Nibbana, enlightenment. Here, Ananda, a monk, is practicing thus. If it were not, it would not be mine. It will not be, and it will not be mine. What exists, what has come to be, that I am abandoning. Thus he obtains equanimity. He does not seek excitement in that equanimity, welcome it, or remain holding to it. Since he does not do so, his consciousness does not become dependent on it and does not cling to it. A monk, Ananda, who is without clinging, attains Nibbana, enlightenment.
Okay, thank you so much. This individual, Ananda, was actually one of the Buddha's closest students. He was with the Buddha a very long time, pretty much his entire 45-year teaching career. The Buddha gets to enlightenment at the age of 35. He dies at the age of 80, and he ends up teaching for 45 years, sharing the teachings that it takes to get to enlightenment. So Ananda is actually either his cousin or his brother-in-law. This is what people think based on what we see in the original teachings and what we know about his life. And he was with the Buddha pretty much his entire teaching career. So Ananda is credited for having remembered the teachings very well, and he's the one who recited them to be able to then write them down after the death of the Buddha when they ultimately get written down. So Ananda, you will see, shows up in a lot of the discourses because he's the one who ultimately remembers the teachings very closely and helps them to write them down after the death of the Buddha. What the Buddha is teaching to Ananda here is that eliminating clinging is what helps you to get to enlightenment. So this craving and clinging. In the foundational courses, I usually combine this as one, and I talk about craving and clinging as one thing, but they're actually two different things. What craving is the longing and yearning for something, the chasing after something, the obsession with it, the wanting, the expecting. But then the clinging is the holding on to something. So say you find a brand new pair of shoes or clothes or technology, you might see it in the window of the store, and now you're longing and yearning for that thing. You're obsessed with it, wanting it so badly. The mind's longing and yearning for it. This is craving. But then let's just say you go in and you buy it, and now you acquire it. And now once you acquire those new shoes, you're holding on to them really tightly, or a new phone or a new computer. This is the clinging. And this is what the mind does, is at first it craves, and then it clings. That's what dependent origination was showing you. And as long as the mind has craving or clinging, then there's going to be discontentedness in the mind. As long as you're longing and yearning for something, sometimes you're going to get what you want, sometimes you can't because of impermanence. And then as long as you're clinging and holding on to something, those things are not permanent. So as long as you're holding on and clinging to something, as things start to change, you'll become discontent. You'll become angry or frustrated or otherwise discontent with any of these discontent feelings. So you need to eliminate all clinging, all craving, and all clinging. Here, the Buddha is focusing on one particular aspect of what the mind might cling to. There's many different things that the mind can cling to. But even here, equanimity. Equanimity is actually a wholesome quality that the mind needs to cultivate in order to get to enlightenment. This is something we're going to be talking about tomorrow in the group learning program. What equanimity is calmness and composure, evenness of temper, especially in difficult situations. There's another component to equanimity as well, but for now we can just think about it in this way, with the calmness and composure, the evenness of temper, especially in difficult situations. So say you got a phone call that your mom had an accident and she's showing up in the hospital, or your child or your dad or your brothers or sisters. Your mind might get shaken up by that if you have clinging and you're trying to hold on to them permanently, not realizing that mom and dad and brothers and sisters, they're impermanent. They're going to be unhealthy sometimes. So if your mind is clinging to them, wanting them to be permanent, not realizing that they are impermanent, when you get a phone call that they're in the hospital, you might be shaken up by that. You're going to have the opposite of equanimity, where the mind isn't calm, it isn't composed. But you can train your mind that even in difficult situations, where maybe you get a phone call that a family member is in the hospital, you can maintain your calmness and composure. And you can realize that that's actually a really wise thing to do, because by maintaining your calmness and composure, now you can make wise decisions that will actually help in the situation. But the Buddha is saying here is that you can't even cling to equanimity. that this calmness and composure that you're developing, all these other wholesome qualities that come through in the enlightened mind as you're training the mind, he's teaching you not to even cling to those qualities. The reason why is because as you're getting closer and closer to enlightenment, eventually when you get to enlightenment, you'll always have equanimity. It will be permanent in the mind. And these other qualities too, like loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, equanimity, mindfulness, wisdom, all these various qualities that you cultivate, they're just always in the mind by the time you get to enlightenment. But on your way to enlightenment, these qualities are not yet permanent in the mind. You'll notice some equanimity shining through for a few hours, a few days, a few weeks, maybe even a month or two, but then it's going to go away because there's still some residual clinging in the mind. You might be clinging to one thing or another, and your equanimity is going to be gone. So if you cling to equanimity itself, on your way to enlightenment, when you have equanimity and your mind's calm and composed, you might get those conditioned pleasant feelings where you're happy and excited because your mind is so calm. But then when that disappears, because it's not yet permanent, the mind is not yet enlightened, you'll experience the sadness or the frustration. So as this peace and calm, serenity, the contentedness and joy start to shine through the mind more and more as you get closer and closer to enlightenment, it's important that you don't even cling to those qualities. Here the Buddha is explaining that you do not excite in it, welcome it, or remain holding on to it. That when you see these qualities of mind starting to show up in the mind, you just kind of know, there's some more peacefulness. Okay, I see you, peacefulness. I see you over there. But you just keep going on in your day. But if you get so excited, like, wow, I've been studying the teachings of the Buddha for 2 months, for 3 months, for a year, for 2 years. Wow, look at all these qualities. I'm so far along on the path. Wow, I'm doing so well. Look at me. This is the ego being boastful, right? And by the time you get to enlightenment, you need to eliminate that boastfulness. But also there's a certain amount of clinging in there that the mind's clinging to these peaceful qualities, these joyful qualities, this equanimity, and they're not yet permanent. So as long as you cling to anything, whether it's a physical object or even a mental object, like something in the mind, like equanimity, as you're experiencing that, you'll have conditioned pleasant feelings. And when you're not experiencing the equanimity, you'll be experiencing those painful feelings. So your mind's not going to get to enlightenment if you cling to these qualities. So the way that I share with students is even when your mind's getting close to enlightenment, never even convince yourself that you're enlightened. You can go 3 months, 6 months where you don't have any discontentedness whatsoever, and you might actually think you're enlightened. And then boom, something happens. And now you've experienced a bit of discontentedness. If you've gone 3 or 6 months without any discontentedness whatsoever, when you experience discontentedness, it'll be very minor. It'll be very insignificant. You'll know exactly what's causing it, and you'll be able to eliminate it pretty readily within probably 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes. But nonetheless, if during that 3 months or 6 months, you're clinging to that peacefulness and clinging to the joy, when that little bit of discontentedness comes to visit you, you'll be discontent that you're discontent. Right? The mind is like stacking this on top of each other. So if you cling to this equanimity, when it's not there, you'll be discontent, right? So it's important to train the mind to not even cling to these qualities of peace and calm, serenity, contentedness, and joy. Don't ever even convince yourself that you're enlightened. Even when it's been 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, you know that you haven't experienced any discontentedness whatsoever, and these teachings have led exactly where the Buddha said that they would lead. Don't even convince yourself that you're enlightened. Just continue to cultivate wisdom, cultivate wisdom. You see the peacefulness, you know it's there. You might smile from time to time, realizing that yes, these teachings have led you exactly where the Buddha said they would, but don't even convince yourself that your mind is actually enlightened. This is a way to not cling to any of these qualities that are starting to shine through. So any questions here on chapter 42? For those of you guys online, you can put those into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. Or those of you here, you're welcome to ask questions with the mics. And even in Zoom, you can electronically raise your hand and ask any questions that you like. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So let's move to the next chapter, which is chapter 43. Is there someone that would like to read that? Yes, sir. Siddharth. Would you mind using one of the mics? I think Josh changed it.
By not clinging, they are freed. Clinging, they look upon with fear, for it produces birth and death, and by not clinging, they are freed. In the destruction of birth and death, they reside in joy, for they are safe, and reach Nibbana, enlightenment, here and now. They are beyond all fear and hate. They have escaped all discontentedness.
Okay, thank you, sir. This is a very short excerpt. Sometimes these chapters are maybe 2 or 3 pages long, but these are all very short today. So here the Buddha is saying, okay, clinging they look upon with fear. Essentially, if you understand what clinging is, and you've seen the truth that your mind is clinging, and when your mind clings, you experience discontentedness, you experience these painful feelings, then essentially what the Buddha is saying is you get to a point where you're like, I'm not interested in that clinging. I'm disinterested in the clinging. So let me give you examples so you can see your mind clinging. If you were on your way to Thailand, for example, or some other destination, your mind was clinging to the fact of you going on this journey or this holiday or this vacation, and you were so excited that you were about to go on this holiday. This is because of the mind's clinging and really wanting this thing really badly. And now say you're clinging to this flight to go to Thailand, and you show up to the airport and it's delayed or it's canceled. Now you'll be frustrated, you'll be angry, you'll be annoyed, and you'll be sitting in that airport the whole 3-hour delay being agitated and frustrated. And even when you get on the plane, you're still agitated and frustrated perhaps. And even when you get to your destination, you might be agitated and frustrated. This is because the mind's clinging. You're craving permanence. It's not possible for these planes to all be on time. It would be lovely if every single plane that was scheduled would be on time. But that's not the world we live in. We live in an impermanent world where there's going to be some planes that depart on time. There's going to be some planes that depart late. And there's even going to be some planes that depart early, that leave from the gate early because all the passengers showed up. And wow, it's like 15 minutes before departure, but we can leave early because everybody's here. Let's go. So this is the impermanent nature of these flights. But if your mind clings to this flight, or clings to this trip to a particular place, you'll be discontent when it doesn't meet to what you want or what you're longing and yearning for. So as long as you allow your mind to cling, which it will, because the mind is untrained in the unenlightened state, and that's why you're training in breathing mindfulness meditation to cut off and let go, so you can eliminate the clinging. So that where you notice with your mindfulness that the mind is holding on or it's clinging, you can train the mind to let it go and no longer experience those discontent feelings. So the Buddha is saying here that if you understand clinging, then you look at it like, I'm not interested in that clinging. That's just going to lead me to painful feelings. If I keep allowing the mind to do that, you're just going to keep ending up in those painful feelings. So he's saying look upon it with fear, but by the time you get to enlightenment, you don't have any fear at all. But on your way to enlightenment, you might look at clinging as something you're disinterested in, that you're not interested in this clinging because you know where it's going to end up, and it's going to just end up in these feelings of grief and misery and displeasure. For it produces birth and death. That not only does the clinging produce discontentedness, but that's what's helping to allow the consciousness to keep coming into the world over and over and over and over again. As long as there's clinging and holding on to this world, you'll continue to experience birth and death over and over and over again. The goal would be to escape all of that discontentedness and escape this constant rebirth in the world over and over again. And by not clinging, they are freed. The mind is freed from discontentedness. We call enlightenment liberation, where the mind is liberated. It's free. It's experiencing freedom from strong feelings. You're no longer burdened and feeling stuck and bound up in the sadness and despair and displeasure over and over and over again. The mind is free. Where right now, all someone has to do is say something to you that you find disagreeable, and you'll get angry, you'll get frustrated. Your mind's not free because that person can just say whatever that your mind has a craving or clinging that you're not interested in hearing. Maybe somebody disrespects you and you get angry because the mind's craving for everyone to respect you. But you live in an impermanent world. Not everyone's going to respect you. It'd be wonderful if they did, but you can't control what other people do. You can't control whether someone respects you or not. When somebody respects you, if you get all these pleasant feelings, then when someone disrespects you, you're going to get those painful feelings, not realizing that this is just all impermanence. It'd be wonderful if everyone respected you, but you're going to experience people who are disrespectful sometimes. And every time somebody's disrespectful, if you get angry, your mind's not free. So you can free your mind. You can't control what other people do, but you can control your own mind. And now when someone's disrespectful, you can train your mind to either ignore it, to keep on walking, to just continue forward. Maybe you don't have a relationship with that person, but your mind can maintain its contentedness and its joy. What you choose to do in the relationship is up to you. But what the Buddha is going to teach you is how to eliminate the discontent feelings so that you can get free from that anger and agitation when somebody chooses to be disrespectful. In the destruction of birth and death, they reside in joy, for they are safe. You're safe from discontentedness. Your mind's been liberated and reach nibbana or enlightenment here and now. The mind's completely liberated. It's completely safe. There's nothing that's going to shake up the enlightened mind. It doesn't matter what's going on in the world around you. By the time you get to enlightenment, your mind's steady, stable, unshakable. Nothing and nobody can shake it up. They are beyond all fear and hate, because by the time you get to enlightenment, you've eliminated all fear and you've eliminated all hate. By the time you get to enlightenment, there isn't even people that you dislike. Right now, maybe hate is a really strong word for you, or maybe you do hate certain people in the world, but you also probably have people you just dislike. By the time you get to enlightenment, you don't even have the dislike in the mind. You can have loving kindness and compassion for all beings. But as long as you have cravings in your mind, there's going to be certain people who do things that you like and that you enjoy and that you agree with. And it's like, yeah, I can hang out with these people. But then because of your cravings, there's certain expectations that you have of people and you don't like them. You might not hate them, but you dislike them because you're wanting them to be a certain way and they're not that way. Your craving's not getting fulfilled. So by the time you get to enlightenment, you don't even have the slightest dislike towards another being. You can love all beings. You can be kind to all beings. You can be compassionate to all beings. You can be polite, kind, friendly, and respectful to all beings because your mind is now liberated. It no longer has this hate. It no longer has the craving, desire, attachment that's producing this hate. But because you live in a world where there's beings who are unenlightened, they're going to have hatred. They're going to have disrespect. But as long as you have hatred, as long as you have disrespect back, you're not solving anything. So even though other people might choose to be angry and hateful and disrespectful, impolite, unkind, unfriendly, even though other people are choosing to be that way, you don't need to choose to be that way because you're not going to extinguish hatred and anger in your mind by being hatred and angry towards other people. So when someone else stands up and they're angry and hateful or disrespectful, if you're angry, hatred, and disrespectful right back, you're not solving the problem within your own mind. So you need to learn that when other people choose to be angry, hateful, and disrespectful, how to remain peaceful and calm and joyful. And this comes with training. And this is how you can get to the elimination of this fear and this hate through training the mind. And having done so, they have escaped all discontentedness. You've eliminated all discontentedness. The mind is enlightened, completely liberated and free. Any questions on this chapter? Yes, ma'am.
I'm concerned about the emphasis on wisdom within it all, because, I mean, even if I understand one of the tenets of Buddhism, even if I understand that everything is impermanent, still crave for there to be permanence, right? So that seems consistent. I don't seem to be like under any illusion, or I'm not wrong about this. There doesn't seem to be a contradiction between realizing that everything is impermanent on the one hand, but on the other hand, wanting the world to be different, or reality to be different. So how do I bridge that gap? Because just the wisdom, just understanding the true nature of reality, won't stop my craving in this case.
Okay, so I'm going to just try to summarize that so that people online can hear. So she's asking about wisdom, and how does wisdom really transform the mind? If I understand something and I have the wisdom of it, how does that relate to me actually being able to transform the mind? Kind of paraphrasing that. So there's the intellectual learning of something. Like you can intellectually understand the universal truth of impermanence. That's the learning part. You can even reflect on that and you can see, yeah, it's true. Everything around me is impermanent. But then there's the practice part, which is what the training of the mind is doing. You need to train the mind to be able to understand impermanence and then practice non-craving. So there's a certain amount of intellectual learning that you acquire, and then there's the practice part. That's where the real wisdom is being cultivated. It's not yet wisdom when you've just learned it and when you've just reflected on it. The real wisdom is when, now that you've intellectually understood it, you implement it into your life, and now you're able to practice it. As long as you're not practicing the teachings, the mind is still ignorant. The mind still has that unknowing of true reality, or the confusion, or the lack of wisdom. So you can intellectually understand the universal truth of impermanence, but the mind can still crave permanence because there's still a lack of wisdom. The mind hasn't fully cultivated the wisdom to practice non-craving. So by the time you fully cultivate wisdom, you will have completely transformed the mind, where it will no longer crave permanence because it will fully understand. It will have fully cultivated the wisdom. But in the process of doing that, there'll be certain teachings that you intellectually understand, but you haven't yet fully been able to practice them. And that's because the mind still has a lack of wisdom. It hasn't yet fully cultivated the wisdom that it needs.
Yeah, so the wisdom is basically divided into theoretical wisdom and practical wisdom, and only if it comes together can we really talk about fully understanding reality, the true nature of reality.
Yeah, you can't fully understand it until you're actually practicing it. So someone could understand something like, say, the 5 precepts, where you're learning about not killing and stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, and intoxicants. You can understand the natural laws of existence, that when you do these things, it's going to be a certain cause, and then there's going to be a certain effect, that you experience unwholesome results based on your unwise decisions to either kill, steal, have sexual misconduct, lie, or take intoxicants. You can intellectually understand, yeah, there's going to be unwholesome results when I do those things. And that's the intellectual learning. But because of one's craving, they might still do those things. And that means the mind is still unknowing of true reality. It still lacks wisdom. It still has this ignorance or confusion. It understands intellectually that these things are unwise, but the mind is still doing it because of those pollutions, that sensual desire that the mind is just still chasing after things with craving. So the mind is not yet fully cultivated wisdom in that situation. When you look at the 10 fetters that the Buddha teaches, the 10 individual pollutions, the 10th one is called ignorance, or the unknowing of true reality. That's what, you're learning a little bit about here today. That's the last fetter to go for everybody, because the way to actually eliminate that fetter is not just the intellectual learning, but the actual practice. So you could say, have done all the work on the path to enlightenment, but you have this one last little thing that the mind's still holding on to, or this one last little thing that the mind hasn't quite figured out yet, and it's still ignorant. So let's just say you've done all the work on the path to enlightenment, but you still have a little bit of ego. You still have a little bit of conceit in the mind, a little bit of boastfulness. Well, that means you have conceit, which is the 8th fetter, but you also have the 10th fetter too, which is the ignorance. You haven't fully cultivated wisdom. You understand the 8th fetter. You understand conceit. You understand the ego. You understand arrogance. You understand boastfulness. You understand it's unwise to do these things, but the mind is still doing it. So there is conceit there, which is the 8th fetter, but there's also ignorance as well. But now when you eliminate that last little bit of ignorance, that last little bit of conceit, that last little bit of arrogance, that last little bit of boastfulness, not only have you eliminated that, but you've eliminated the ignorance as well. And now the mind is enlightened, right? So to get to wisdom, you need to fully cultivate it in your practice and actually be doing it. So that's where you can see, like, a scholar or an academic or a historian, they might understand intellectually, but they're not actually practicing. But even though they understand intellectually, they don't have the same level of wisdom as someone who's actually practicing the teachings. So A person who just understands intellectually, they're not going to have the deep, profound wisdom as someone who's actually practicing. And that's why you should always, if you're looking for a teacher, is look at their practice. It's great somebody can sit down and explain the teachings to you, but how are they practicing them? Right? You should see the practice. That's where you know they've fully cultivated the wisdom.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Let's see if we have any other questions here. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions. So let's move on to Arturo.
Yeah, can you tell us a little bit more about those two words that have come up a few times? Shyness on the one hand. Shyness on the one hand.
You're saying shyness?
Shyness.
Okay.
And then boastfulness on the other.
Sure. So shyness is typically coming from the first fetter, which we call personal existence view. This is where the mind's clinging to the body or the mind, thinking that this is who you are, wanting to be perceived in the world a certain way. So like if you spill spaghetti sauce or ice cream on your clothes and you get embarrassed, this is because of the mind thinking that this body is you. That embarrassment is arising because you're clinging to the body, wanting to be perceived a certain way. And when you're not being perceived that way, you become embarrassed. And then the same thing, there's certain aspects in the mind of self-identity. So there's a self-image and there's a self-identity that the mind might be clinging to. Like I am Italian, or I am Spanish, or I am Canadian, or I am German, or I am Japanese, or I am Irish. This I am, or I am a Buddhist teacher, or I am a police officer, I'm a boyfriend, I'm a girlfriend, I'm a husband, I'm a wife. There's this identity that the mind's clinging to, thinking that this is who you are, wanting to be perceived in the world a certain way. And then when you don't experience that, the mind gets shaken up and it doesn't like this. So oftentimes when people are shy, they're afraid to be embarrassed because they want to be perceived in the world a certain way. So this is why some people really fear public speaking, for example, because they're wanting to be perceived by others a certain way and they're craving for everyone to perceive them in a certain way, and their mind can't get that. And then when people perceive them in a positive way or an agreeable way, they get happy. But then if somebody perceives them in a negative way, they get angry or frustrated, irritated. But by the time you get rid of that craving, you get rid of that personal existence view, you won't experience shyness anymore. But then with the other one, you said boastfulness. This one is coming from the conceit, which is the eighth fetter, where these two things combined is what we call the ego, personal existence view and conceit. During the lifetime of the Buddha, that word ego didn't exist yet. And he properly described these two fetters as two separate things, which is personal existence view and conceit, because they're different and they have different symptoms and they have different solutions. What conceit is this is the arrogance, the pride, the measuring and comparing, the boastfulness, the judging people, putting yourself above people or below people. And as long as the mind's doing this, you're going to find that you're going to lack the ability to live harmoniously with others, because in some situations you'll put yourself above people and talk down to them, and then it'll drive people away from you because you're trying to be so boastful and you're trying to be above them. And in other cases, you'll put yourself below people and you'll feel shaken up and uncalm and unsettled around people because you think they're so high above you. And this again will promote difficulties in your relationships. So by the time you eliminate that boastfulness, which that arrogance, the conceit is in there, you'll be able to live harmoniously with others. You won't be measuring and comparing, trying to put yourself above or below people. And this also, I know that you've been asking me questions about the cycle of rebirth. This is part of where you can see some of the cycle of rebirth, because where this comes from is our past animal existences, where in the animal world, we needed to know who's above us and who's below us. Like when we were a wolf pack, we needed to know who's the alpha male and alpha female, because they're showing us how to hunt, they're breeding, they're the ones who are showing us how to fight, they're showing us how to get food. When we were an elephant herd, we needed to know who the matriarch of the tribe is, or of the herd is, because the matriarch, she's going to show us the migration paths, she's going to show us where the food and the water is. We wouldn't survive if we didn't know who was above us and who was below us. So in the animal world, we need this pecking order. But by the time we come into the human world, the consciousness has held on to this conditioning from the animal world, and now in the human world, there's certain human beings that have a significant amount of conceit, or even if you have a little bit of conceit, your mind's going to be wanting to put yourself above people or below people, and now you're not going to be able to live harmoniously with all beings, and you'll struggle. So by eliminating personal existence view, you eliminate any and all shyness. You won't be shy anymore in any situations whatsoever. And then by the time you eliminate conceit, you won't be boastful. You won't be judging others. You won't be looking down on people. You won't be looking up to people. You'll just view everybody as equally. You'll be humble. Just see yourself as just one person among many people. Even if you were like the prime minister or the president of a country, or you were the leader of a company, of a big business, and maybe you have 5,000 employees or 100,000 employees, you would just see yourself as just like all the other employees. You're not going to have a special parking spot just for you. You're not going to have, certain things where people have to acknowledge your power and your prestige. You're going to just be humble, just like everyone else. Like the past king of Thailand, sometimes it would be flooded in the villages. He would roll up his pants legs. He would go out there with his sketch pad and his camera and start walking through the flooded waters and helping the government understand how to release this flood from the village so the villager's house could be saved. Now, he didn't go around being carried by people like, oh, his feet can't get wet. No, he rolled up his pants legs, went right out there in the water with everybody else. So this is what you can do when you see yourself as just equal and everybody's the same. So by eliminating the fetter of personal existence view and conceit, your mind will be able to reside more peaceful. Because one of the things that happens when you have conceit and you have to put yourself above or below people is whenever you come into a social setting like this, right away you start measuring people up and you start trying to figure out who's above me and who's below me. And now your mind, when you're talking to somebody, you almost have to switch back and forth. This person's below me, so I talk to them in this way. This person's above me, so I need to talk to them in that way. And now your mind's having to constantly switch back and forth. And when you're in mixed company, it becomes very exhausting to try to maintain this. Whereas if you just build your practice where you treat everybody equally and everybody the same, and you just treat people polite, kind, friendly, and respectful through the moral conduct that you learn in the Eightfold Path, now your mind doesn't have to be exhausted switching back and forth of who's above me and who's below me. You can just treat everybody the same, and it's much easier for you to exist in the world with individuals because your mind can just treat everyone equally, and you see yourself as just the same as everyone else. You're welcome. Okay, so let's move to the next chapter, chapter 44. Would you like to read this one, Arturo, since you have the mic? Eliminate any shyness that you might have, if there's any at all.
Calm and reflection have part in true wisdom. Monks, these two qualities have part in true wisdom. What two? Calm and reflection. If cultivated, what profit does calm attain? The mind is cultivated. What profit results from a cultivated mind? All craving is abandoned. Monks, if reflection is cultivated, what profit does it attain? Wisdom is cultivated. If wisdom is cultivated, what profit does it attain? All ignorance is abandoned. A mind defiled by craving is not liberated. And wisdom defiled by ignorance, unknowing of true reality, is not developed. Thus, monks, through the fading away of craving, there is liberation of mind. And through the fading away of ignorance, unknowing of true reality, there is liberation by wisdom.
All right, thank you, sir. So here the Buddha is talking about these two qualities of calm and reflection. Calm is that equanimity, the ability to be calm and composed. When your mind's shaken up, you can't get to wisdom. It's just not possible. Because when your mind is uncalm, then you don't have mindfulness or awareness of mind. When you don't have awareness of mind, you don't have concentration, which is like focus and clarity of mind. When you don't have focus and clarity of mind, you can't get to wisdom. So by maintaining your calmness, you have mindfulness or awareness of mind. You have concentration or focus and clarity of mind. And now you can access your wisdom and make wise decisions. We've all experienced times in the past when your mind wasn't trained and you maybe get a phone call or you get some news of something that's happened and you get all shaken up. And let's just say you get a phone call that your mom's in the hospital. She's been in a terrible accident. You might grab your car keys. Your mind's all shaken up. You run out the door. You jump in the car. You bolt across town to get to the hospital. You may have gotten in an accident yourself along the way. You may have got a speeding ticket. You show up to the hospital. You're all shaken up and nervous and you can't even understand what the doctors and nurses are saying. And now you're going to have difficulties making wise decisions. It's going to help your mom. But by maintaining your calmness through a well-cultivated mind, now you can maintain your calmness. You can maintain your mindfulness, your concentration. And now when you get that phone call, you understand, well, okay, mom's been in a car accident. Let me make my way to the hospital. Let me stay calm. And then that way, when I get there, I can make wise decisions to talk to the doctors and nurses. And then I will be able to access my wisdom to be able to help her in the best way possible. So what the Buddha is saying here is that by cultivating this calmness, the mind can abandon all craving. Because when your mind is uncalm and it's shaken up, it's because of craving. So in that example that I gave you with getting the phone call that mom's been in a hospital or car accident, she's at the hospital, and your mind gets all shaken up, that's because you have a craving for mom to be permanently healthy. There's a longing and a yearning for it. So that's the unwise part of it. What you would like to do is get to this middle part, right? If you have this craving for mom to always be healthy, when she's unhealthy, you're going to be shaken up. But also if you were over here and you didn't care less about mom, you were indifferent about mom, and you could care less whether she's healthy or not, that's not going to be wise either. So you would like to come to this middle where you have the aspiration, you have the goal, the interest for mom to be healthy, and you make decisions to be able to ensure that mom can be healthy. But you realize that mom is impermanent. She's going to be unhealthy at some point. So if you can maintain your calmness and composure, your equanimity, then you can get to the point where you eliminate all craving. Because when the mind is impatient, that's because of craving. When you're wanting to go, and you just can't be patient and just like chill out and hang out and relax. Or if you get to like a government office and you're trying to get your driver's license and you're impatient, or you're going to immigration and you really want to hurry up and get something done, right? This is the craving in the mind. So if you can maintain your calmness and composure in those situations, then all the craving is abandoned. And when all craving is abandoned, this is where your mind is actually enlightened. So then the way that you get to that abandoning of the craving is through this reflection. What reflection is this inward looking eye, this introspection where you look inward and you start reflecting on your thoughts and the various things that you're experiencing, the various learning that you're doing and investigating the teachings. You're starting to reflect on those and look inward and try to discover if they're actually true or not. And what that reflection leads to is it leads to this wisdom. You cultivate this wisdom about the path to enlightenment. You learn, you reflect to independently verify, and then you practice. And that's what leads to this wisdom, that inward looking eye, that introspection is what's going to lead to this wisdom. And if wisdom is cultivated, what profit does it attain? Well, you abandon this ignorance. And remember, this ignorance is the practice. It's not just the intellectual learning. The intellectual learning is just one step on your way to acquiring wisdom. You need that intellectual learning to be there, but the intellectual learning by itself isn't the wisdom. That's just the bringing in of content to be able to investigate. Then you're doing the reflection to look inward, to independently verify if it's true. And then you need to ultimately practice a certain teaching to figure out if it's true. So for example, if I teach you meditation, you can learn about it sitting in a class like this or a book. You can learn about meditation. And then you can start reflecting on it and be like, yeah, it would be good to be more calm. Yeah, it would be good to have some more mindfulness and concentration. Yeah, it would be good to be kind of letting go of things and not holding on to them really closely. So you could learn meditation and you could reflect on those teachings and be like, yeah, this is looking pretty good. But you're not going to fully cultivate the wisdom until you practice that meditation and you start practicing it and you see the real improvement to the condition of the mind, that's where wisdom is fully cultivated and all ignorance is abandoned. As you're doing this with each individual teaching, not just with the teachings on meditation, but all the teachings that you're learning, you're gradually cultivating this wisdom to then be able to eliminate ignorance. And in order to do that, you're going to need to have this reflection and look inward. And then that's what the Buddha is saying here, kind of summarizing it at the end, that a mind defiled with craving is not liberated. Meaning, as long as the mind has this pollution of craving, it's not free. It's still experiencing these discontent feelings. And wisdom defiled by ignorance or unknowing of true reality is not developed. So if you only have intellectual learning, and it still has this ignorance, you haven't been practicing the teachings, then the wisdom is not yet fully developed. The mind is not yet fully developed. Thus, monks, through the fading away of craving, meaning the gradual elimination of craving, there is liberation of mind. By gradually training your mind through meditation, through generosity, through all the other teachings that you learn to eliminate craving, the mind gradually gets to this liberation, to this freedom. And through the fading away of ignorance or that unknowing of true reality, there is liberation by wisdom. The mind is liberated through wisdom. If you understand dependent origination, and ignorance is that top condition that ultimately goes through 12 interlinking steps that ends up with discontentedness, the way to break all this up and dismantle it is to cultivate wisdom. That's the top thing. That's what you're encouraged to do on the path to enlightenment, is never believe the teachings, independently verify them. That's how you get to wisdom, and that's how you transform the mind. Any questions on this chapter? Cultivating calm and reflection. Yeah, could you use the mic if you don't mind? One of them. You guys are so nice, helping each other. Very good.
Okay. So I wanted to ask you, just mentioned something that was interesting. Maybe you could say more about it. So craving, how to eliminate craving is through meditation and generosity. But you mentioned there are other things as well. So I would be just interested in hearing what other techniques or strategies there are.
Sure. So breathing mindfulness meditation and generosity are the two generalized trainings that you're employing on a consistent, ongoing basis, daily. The Buddha talks about practicing these daily in order to eliminate craving and clinging. Because the breathing mindfulness meditation, you're cultivating the mindfulness, the concentration, you're training the mind to easily let go in your meditation. And then generosity is doing the same thing, that as you're giving and sharing without any expectation of anything in return, you are training the mind to let go, because the mind tends to be selfish when it has craving and clinging. So those are ongoing, and the Buddha talks about doing those daily, right? But then there's things like in daily life with your mindfulness and awareness of mind, where you see the mind craving, where it's longing and yearning. You're walking through the mall, you see your mind really wanting that new pair of shoes, and you're like, I've got like 30 pairs of shoes at home. What do I need that pair of shoes for? So you restrain the mind, you pull it back in the moment. That's not meditation. It's not generosity. It's not anything else. It's practicing mindfulness, which is from the Eightfold Path, right mindfulness. And it's practicing right effort from the Eightfold Path, which is to eliminate the unwholesome qualities and cultivate the wholesome qualities, applying the effort. So there's things like this that you'll need to do. And then what you learned last Sunday, where you're identifying your cravings and then putting the mind in the situation that it's having difficulties with, that's a technique that you can use to eliminate craving as well. So all of these things combined are helping you to eliminate your craving and clinging, and you do that on a consistent, ongoing basis. So each person has their own unique craving and clinging, and I use different examples from my life of things I used to crave and cling, but you'll be able to see, if you use discontentedness as the red light on the dashboard of your car, whenever you see your mind discontent about something, you can look at the mind with this reflection and be like, okay, what am I craving here? I'm agitated, I'm annoyed, I'm frustrated. What is it that I'm craving? I want my mom to call me on the phone and she hasn't called me in like 2 weeks. I really want her to call me so bad. I'm attached to mom. Or you'll have to figure those things out along the way. That's why it's your own independent journey to enlightenment, where you're cultivating the wisdom of how to do these things and how to practice these tools and techniques. And then where you have challenges, you talk with a teacher that can provide you guidance, because sometimes you might not be able to figure out what your cravings are. Or you might think it's 1 or 2 or 3 cravings, but you're not actually sure and you need that confirmation. So we're here to help you and guide you along the way. Koshi and Christopher. Yep. Go ahead, Koshi. Christopher will get the mic next.
Okay. So is dependent origination also verifiable, like in every moment? Like it is more written as birth and how birth happens, but is it also verifiable when craving and clinging happens? So how do we independently verify dependent origination?
Yeah, the way that you independently verify this is if you look at dependent origination like an equation, almost like a math equation, where like ignorance plus craving equals discontentedness, right? So that's where when I talk about craving, anger, and ignorance as the 3 poisons, I will usually sum that up with, yes, we talk about it as craving, anger, and ignorance, but it's really because of ignorance, craving and anger continues. So ignorance is the top line of dependent origination, cravings like right there in the middle, and the discontentedness is the output, right? It's the anger. That's the discontentedness along with those other conditioned feelings. So if you understand this equation and you understand that as you cultivate wisdom on the path to enlightenment, you're learning, reflecting, and practicing to be able to cultivate wisdom, and you're eliminating cravings, and you see your discontentedness is diminishing, then you can see that this equation is explaining how you get to discontentedness, but it's also explaining to you how you eliminate discontentedness. And when you follow this equation and you put in more and more wisdom, and there's less and less and less craving and clinging, then there's less and less discontentedness. You can see that this equation is true. And then you can walk through step by step by step, and you can see that, yes, there have been certain decisions that you've made that were unwise based in ignorance. There's these volitional formations, and you continue to experience this consciousness over and over. You take up this name and form, this body. Then there's these 6 sense bases that mature in the womb. Then there's this contact that we experience. Then there's these feelings that arise. You can walk through each one of those steps and see how this is actually true. So you can look at it from more of a high level, but then you can dissect each individual piece and walk through it that way as well.
Okay, I get it. And one more, like, why is it called volitional formation? Because after that, like, being does not have choice to make. They are just born by karma, is what I understand. So how is volitional formation playing there?
Yeah, so we're making choices and decisions all the time. Like you guys made the decision to come to this class today, whether you're here at the temple or online, you've made a conscious choice that I'm going to go attend this class. And you've decided to be here for a certain period of time. And then there's certain people who've decided they're not going to be here for a certain period of time. Maybe they had something else going on in their life, right? So there's a conscious choice, and that choice is always going to lead to some effect. There's always a choice, and that's going to lead to an effect, or a cause and effect, or action and result. We're making choices in this life, and we've made choices in our past lives. And all those choices are going to lead to some effect. So by us choosing not to train our mind, by us choosing not to cultivate wisdom, we had craving in our last life, the life before this. We had craving in our last life. And because of that craving in our last life, it produced this life. So we made decisions in our past life that produced this life. And now in this life, we're making decisions that are producing certain results for us here in this life. So if you continue to experience anger and sadness and frustration and all these other discontent feelings in this life, it's a choice that an individual is making. They're choosing not to train their mind. An individual is choosing not to cultivate wisdom. They're choosing not to meditate. They're choosing not to understand the Four Noble Truths. And those choices are then going to lead to a certain effect, which is discontentedness in this life, but also rebirth into another life where they're going to continue to experience discontentedness over and over and over again. So the way that you escape out of this continuous cycle that is explained in dependent origination is to cultivate wisdom. And that's where you see, by inserting wisdom, now you get more and more peacefulness in this life. And then you'll know by the time you get to enlightenment, where your mind's completely peaceful for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, you'll know that you've escaped discontentedness in this life. And you know that there won't be any more lives in the future to keep coming back over and over to experience continuous discontentedness and rebirth over and over and over again.
Okay, I get it. And ignorance is the fuel that is letting this fire burn.
Craving is the fuel that causes rebirth, but the only reason why craving exists is because of ignorance. If it wasn't for ignorance, craving wouldn't exist. But craving itself is the fuel, it's the burning, it's the raging. The ignorance doesn't, we call it a fire and it needs to be extinguished, but ignorance by itself isn't the same as like a craving. A craving, there's going to be rage, but the only reason why that's there is because of the ignorance, the lack of wisdom.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. You're welcome.
Okay. In talking about craving or finding ways to overcome craving, I've heard you reference sort of putting yourself in the situation where you're going to have to deal with it many times. But the Buddha also talks about guarding the sensory doors. I'd like to know your thoughts about where is the dividing line between where you do the one or you do the other.
Sure. It depends on whether it's a wholesome thing or an unwholesome thing. So for example, when I was eliminating coffee or like maybe alcohol or drugs or something like this, what you would like to do is distance yourself from that sense object, from the central desire. You need to distance yourself from it, distance the mind from it, so that now you can train your mind to let it go. Because it would be unwise to continue to use drugs and alcohol and even caffeine. It produces heedlessness and things like this. So you're going to distance yourself from it and get away from this thing. And that's going to train your mind to let it go. And during that period of time, the mind is somewhat sensitive that if you smelled a little bit of marijuana or you smelled a little bit of coffee, your mind might lean towards that and really want to go to that because your craving arises. So in those situations where if you acquired that thing, it would produce unwholesome results, it's better to separate yourself from the particular object. But then there's certain situations like, say, like a sound, right? Like there's nothing unwholesome about being in an environment where there's certain sounds. Like if you go to a public environment and you're agitated or irritated because of certain sounds, you can distance yourself from that for a period of time to train your mind to let go, but that's not going to ultimately train your mind to eliminate your craving, because if you push away the sound or the large crowd or something like that, and you always try to be in small crowds, your mind's just holding on to the craving and clinging that you have. The way to eliminate this craving is to put your mind into the situation where you're in a large crowd or you're around sounds that the mind particularly might find undesirable or disagreeable. So when you put your mind in that situation of the sound, or like a flavor, if there's a certain flavor that hits your tongue that you're repulsed by it, it's better to put your mind in that situation and give your mind some impermanence. So maybe when you eat a piece of chocolate cake, wow, you really enjoy that, you get pleasant feelings. But maybe if you eat like a bitter nut squash, I think they call it in Thailand. It's very bitter, right? If you eat that, maybe you're repulsed by it. Well, the way to eliminate that craving is to keep eating bitternut squash, keep eating it over and over. Or if you don't like durian or something like this, you keep eating it regularly. And you might not do it every day, but once a week, once every 2 weeks, you need to introduce that onto the tongue so the mind gets used to, yeah, you're going to get this chocolate cake and that's going to taste good, but sometimes I'm going to give you these other things too, and you're going to need to learn how to be peaceful and joyful even when you get that bitternut squash or that durian or whatever other flavors that your mind might particularly not like. So in those situations, you're not producing anything unwholesome by eating durian or by eating bitternut squash or by going into a large crowd. There's nothing unwholesome. There's no unwholesome karma that you're producing. You're actually producing wholesome karma, because in that situation, your mind has a craving. It doesn't want to be in large crowds. It doesn't want this particular flavor. So the wholesome karma, the wise decision, is to put it in that situation so that it can eliminate its craving and clinging. Over here with like drugs or alcohol, it would be unwholesome and unwise to acquire those drugs and alcohol and then ingest them. So you're making the wise decision to distance yourself from it so that you're not producing this unwholesome results or unwholesome karma. You're always interested in making the wise decisions. So you look at the object and say, is it going to produce wholesome results? Or is it going to produce unwholesome results? And that'll tell you whether you need to distance yourself from something, or do you need to put the mind in the situation in order to train it to let go of its craving.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. Okay, so I'm not seeing any other questions anywhere. So let's go to the next chapter, which is chapter 45. Is there someone that would like to read this? Christopher, yeah.
The motivation. Monks, an effort should be made to understand. This is discontentedness. This is the cause of discontentedness. This is the elimination of discontentedness. This is the way leading to the elimination of discontentedness. Thus, monks, I have taught you the destination and the path leading to the destination. Whatever should be done, monks, by a compassionate teacher out of compassion for his disciples, aspiring for their welfare, that I have done for you. Monks, there are the feet of trees. Monks, these are empty huts. Meditate, monks, do not be complacent, lest you regret it later. This is my instruction to you. Why is that? Because he is out of the evil one's range.
Okay, thank you, Christopher. So here, the Buddha is, this is the closest you're ever going to get to the Buddha, like kind of saying like, all right, go do something, like go meditate, like, you really need to do this, right? Like sometimes what you see in certain environments is people putting pressure on you and forcing you and trying to put their expectations or controlling you to do something. An enlightened being is not going to do that. They're not going to pressure you. They're not going to guilt, shame, and fear you into doing something. They're not going to push you or try to force you or control you. But here, the Buddha is motivating you to meditate and to develop your mind on the path to enlightenment. And the first thing that he's talking about here is he's saying, monks, an effort should be made to understand this is discontentedness, this is the cause, this is the elimination, and this is the way leading to the elimination of discontentedness. This is him pointing to the Four Noble Truths. You'll see this in his teachings over and over and over and over and over and over again. So many different teachings that he has where he's pointing to the Four Noble Truths, because that's the beginning of the path. Everyone who starts on the path to enlightenment, if they're really starting at the very beginning, they would start with the Four Noble Truths. That's the first thing that you need to know, because that's where you're going to understand the problem in the mind, the cause, the elimination, and the path forward. If you don't understand what's causing the discontent feelings, how could you ever eliminate them? The whole path to enlightenment is to eliminate discontent feelings. So you need to know what the cause is. So it's the Four Noble Truths. Here he's just pointing to it. He's not explaining what the Four Noble Truths are. He's just pointing to it. And then you go learn the Four Noble Truths and you walk through, be able to learn, independently verify through your reflections and then practice so you can understand what's causing these feelings so that then you can eliminate them. And then he explains to you the path forward, which is the Eightfold Path. That's the core central teaching that's going to lead to the elimination of discontentedness. So here he then goes on and he says, I have taught you the destination, meaning enlightenment, and the path leading to the destination. That's the Eightfold Path. And then he says, whatever should be done, monks, by a compassionate teacher, out of compassion for his disciples, aspiring for their welfare, that I have done for you. So compassion is concern for the misfortune of others. By the time you get to enlightenment, you have fully developed compassion, among other qualities of mind. We're going to be talking about these 4 tomorrow: loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. These are 4 healthy mental states that you need to cultivate on your way to enlightenment. It antidotes very specific things that the mind is experiencing certain symptoms of. If you don't have compassion, the opposite of that is indifference, where your mind will be indifferent to other people's suffering and other people's challenges in life. You're like, who cares? That's their karma. I don't care about them. I only care about myself. But by the time you get to fully cultivating compassion, you will have concern for the misfortune of others. You won't be craving and longing and yearning. You won't be worried about others, but you'll have concern for them, right? So that's the middle way. Whereas if you were indifferent, that's not the middle. If you were craving and longing and yearning and feeling worried and anxious, having anxiety every time something is wrong with somebody, that's not the middle either. So compassion is the middle. So in order to provide teachings where you're helping people to get to enlightenment and you have no expectation of anything in return from them, you need to have a certain amount of compassion, concern for the misfortune of others. So the Buddha, having taught these students for 45 years and various students coming and going, he would have had deep compassion. He didn't want anything from anybody. He didn't have expectations of them. He was just sharing with them the teachings that it would take to lead to enlightenment. And then he was accepting donations to be able to support his food, water, clothing, shelter, medical care, things like this. That's all his basic needs. That's all he needed. He didn't have craving to be rich and wealthy. He already had that in the past. He was the prince destined to become a king. And then he also lived a very disparaging life for a period of time where he disparaged the human body for 2 years and starving the body and doing all these other kind of horrible things where he was almost dead before he finally came to the middle way and realized that, okay, I need to eat, I need to drink, I need to do these things, and then I can just share these teachings. He didn't have craving to be famous or a millionaire or all these other things, because that's not going to lead to peacefulness and joy, just chasing after those things. So he's saying everything that should be done by a compassionate teacher, that's what he's done, because he aspires for the welfare of his students. Sometimes a teacher does things with their students that the students may not necessarily understand. Like, for example, sometimes students will post in the Facebook group that I am administrator of. And in this Facebook group, they will post and then they're asking me a question. And then I will answer this question. And it's only me who's providing answers to the questions in the Facebook group. But sometimes if a student posts a question in there, it goes into this queue. And then if they have a craving to hurry up and get an answer, they might send me an email after or a message after a few hours, or after a day or so. They're like, hey, why haven't you answered my question? Like, come on, I need this answer. Well, out of compassion for this person, I'm not going to answer their question. I'm going to wait like 2 or 3 days, maybe even 4 or 5, 6 days before I answer their question, because I'm creating an environment in which their mind can let go of this craving. If I answer their question right away when they ask, I'm not helping them, because their craving is getting fulfilled. And now they still have that craving. They're going to be longing and yearning for that and something else. And now if they get what they want, they'll get pleasant feelings. If they don't get what they want, they'll get painful feelings. So out of compassion, a teacher observing a student's craving, sometimes what we do is we create an environment in which a student has the ability and the opportunity to let go of a particular craving. And this is just one example from my life that I can share with you guys, that if I see a student craving and clinging, I'm not trying to harm them. I'm not trying to hurt them. I'm not trying to cause them painful feelings, because I can't cause them painful feelings. The only thing that's causing them painful feelings is their craving. And if I allowed this to continue, then they're just going to continue to experience the painful feelings. So the most loving, kind, compassionate thing that I could ever do is provide an environment where this person has the opportunity to eliminate their craving. But the student may not realize that. Depending on where they are in their journey, They might be experiencing sadness or anger or agitation because I haven't done what they want me to do. And now they might be experiencing these painful feelings, falsely attributing those painful feelings to me, perhaps. So the Buddha, I'm sure, did these kinds of things as he was teaching too. And there were probably certain students who were maybe a little bit disgruntled with him. They hadn't fully established right view, thinking that it was the Buddha that was causing their painful feelings. So he's reminding people here, hey, everything that I do is out of compassion for you, right? That he's functioning in a way that has their best interest at heart, that he's aspiring for their welfare, that even though the student may not realize what the teacher's doing, that he's doing it out of compassion for them. So that's what he's reminding his students here. And then he says, okay, having pointed you to the Four Noble Truths, having understood that everything I do as a teacher is to help you and aspire for your welfare out of this compassion, now what you need to do is go meditate. This is what's going to lead you to improved condition of mind, among other things. He's sharing with his students to not be complacent. Complacency is like dullness, lethargic, unmotivated, unwilling to show initiative. So if you were complacent in your meditation practice, or if you were complacent in learning the teachings of the Buddha, you're not going to be able to get to enlightenment. When the Buddha talks about complacency in other teachings, he also talks about complacency like if you have an unwholesome thought that comes into your mind and you allow it to persist, that's complacency too. So say you're walking down the street, you're noticing that you're judging the person on the other side of the street, and you're checking them out and you're starting to judge them and measuring, compare them. If you allow that thought of judgment to reside in your mind, you're being complacent. What he teaches you is to have mindfulness, awareness of mind that your mind's judging, and now apply right effort to cut that off and let it go. That's how you eliminate complacency, is by taking the initiative to do something, the willingness to do something, that you have enthusiasm and motivation to actually do something. Here he's talking about meditation, but in other teachings he talks about complacency so far as just allowing an unwholesome thought to exist in the mind. So if you're waking up in the morning and you're starting to have unwholesome thoughts, if you just allow that to ruminate in the mind's complacent. You need to apply effort to cut it off, whether it's meditating or doing something else like redirecting the mind, or if you're in the shower or you're dozing off at night and you see unwholesome thoughts coming up in your mind, you're walking down the street, any of this stuff, cut it off and let it go. Don't allow the mind to be complacent. And meditation is a very important thing that you need to be sure that you're not complacent about, because meditation is helping you build the qualities of mind so that in daily life where you see those unwholesome thoughts come up, you can cut them off and let them go. So the Buddha here is encouraging his students to not be complacent in their meditation practice, because you'll regret it later. When you're angry, when you're frustrated, when you're feeling jealous, when you're feeling remorseful, when you're feeling guilty or lonely or bored, you'll regret having not meditated. So the opposite of this complacency is dedication, diligence, determination. If you have determination, dedication, and diligence in your meditation practice and all your other aspects of developing the path, you can get to the point where your mind's liberated. But if you don't put in the dedication and the diligence and your mind's complacent, maybe you're not coming to the temple, maybe you're not reading books, maybe you're not meditating, maybe you're not having conversations with your fellow community members or your teacher to be able to get help on the path. If the mind's complacent in any of these things, then your mind will kind of fall away, right? You won't be able to stay dedicated to the path. So here the Buddha is saying you'll regret it later if you aren't meditating. And when your mind's discontent, you'll regret having not meditated. And then he talks about that one is out of the evil one's range. What he's referring to here is a being that he talks about as Mara. Mara is a formless being that is interested in causing calamity in the world. This being is interested in causing all kinds of unwholesomeness to occur in the world. And this being is going to try to motivate you and to do these unwise things. It's going to try to tempt you. Some traditions might refer to this as the devil or Satan or Lucifer or something like this. The Buddha refers to this being as Mara, and sometimes just the evil one that is interested in causing this calamity. So this being is going to try to tempt you into doing various things, and beings on Mara's behalf is going to try to tempt you into doing unwholesome and unwise things. But it's ultimately your decision of what you choose to do or not do. And your wisdom is going to guide you to know what is wise or unwise. But when your mind has a certain lack of wisdom, you might be easily influenced in one way or the other. So you would like to cultivate enough wisdom that as Mara or beings working on Mara's behalf are tempting you, that you have the control and the discipline and the wisdom of the mind to not be tempted. That you can say, I see what's going on there, but I'm not going to do that. Like maybe you have friends or people who are inviting you for drugs or alcohol, or maybe you're in a relationship and somebody is trying to tempt you to come out of your relationship and be able to have sex with them and be disloyal to your partner. This is all Mara trying to tempt you. It might be an actual human being who you're talking to, or that person is discussing that with you, but Mara is in there influencing individuals' minds. It's up to each individual to choose to do or not do certain things, but Mara is going to be there trying to influence you. And with a fully cultivated mind, Mara won't be able to influence you. In fact, once you get to the jhanas, which are these 4 preliminary phases that the mind goes through before you get to the first stage of enlightenment, by the time you get to the jhanas, Mara can't tempt you anymore. The Buddha describes it as blindfolding Mara, because Mara knows that you've cultivated enough wisdom by that point that they can't tempt you. So they won't even try. And this is where you will have gotten to a certain amount of wisdom that you won't be tempted by anything that Mara might try to do. But by that point, Mara knows that, and Mara won't even try to tempt you anymore. So here, this is called the motivation, that you would like to get away from this being of the evil one, because as long as there's those tempting in that influence there, then you could easily be persuaded to different things that are unwise and that would produce unwholesome results for you. Any questions here on this chapter? Yeah, we got a few. If you guys could grab mics there. And then it looks like we have one online as well.
Thank you. Okay. My question is, so at the middle of the verse of the chapter, so it says, these are the feet of trees, monks, these are empty hearts. So it sounds like figuratively described, but I'm not sure the meaning.
Yeah, so this is where he encouraged people to meditate during his lifetime, that they would meditate at the base of a tree, or they would meditate in these empty huts. They would oftentimes meditate in the forest as well. So this is where he's just saying, okay, here's the feet of a tree, here's an empty hut, go meditate, be sure to do that. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I see. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Sorry, but so the current situation, so which we have now. So if we have such a place, it would be great. But here it's really so kind of the best place. So, but we could do so, even though we don't have such a feet of trees or empty nice hut.
Yeah, I encourage people to move their meditation practice around. You're going to meditate probably in your bedroom, in your living room, your dining room, maybe at a park, maybe at different temples. You can move your mind around into different environments, because if you meditate in just the same place all the time, the mind will start craving and clinging that. And when you're somewhere else, you'll have difficulties to meditate. So when someone gets established, like the first 4 to 8 weeks, it's wise to kind of meditate in the same general place, because that'll help you develop your practice. But shortly thereafter, you'd like to start moving the mind around so that it doesn't start craving and clinging and holding on to the destination of meditation or location of where you're meditating. So if you can change environments, it actually really helps, because you're going to get different lighting, different sounds, and different things like that. So like here at the temple, when people are meditating, when there's occasional sounds, I'm like, yeah, that's great. All right. Like you hear a car go by, or you'll hear like the tools that are going. Some people think you should only meditate when it's completely quiet, but quietness isn't permanent. Right? So you're going to hear sounds as you're meditating. Even if you go out into the middle of the forest, there's going to be sounds. Or if you're in a cave, there's going to be sounds. So you can't permanently meditate in quiet. So it's actually good to move your mind around into different environments, so your mind gets used to this impermanence, and you can get to the point where you can meditate anywhere, anytime.
Okay. Okay, that's a good point. Thank you.
You're welcome.
From a Buddhist perspective, is Mara a real being, or is it a metaphor for all things that tempt us, or all unwholesome decisions or deeds? Yeah.
It's a real being that you can actually have interaction with. You may or may not have been aware, but this is an actual being. It's a formless being that exists, and this being can influence you at different times, or beings working on their behalf. So there's some people who have had actual interaction with this being. I've had interaction with this being to know that it's actually a real being. Mm-hmm. All right. I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. I thought that was a question, but it was actually Marcy just thanking us for the learning and the teaching. So I'm going to move on to the last chapter for today, which is chapter 46. Is there someone who would like to read this? This ultimately gets to the last words of the Buddha before he dies. Josh or Kushi, either one.
The Tathagatas, final passing. Monks, for this reason, those matters which I have discovered and proclaimed should be thoroughly learnt by you, practiced, developed, and cultivated, so that this holy life may endure for a long time, that it may be for the benefit and peacefulness of the multitude, many people, out of compassion for the world, for the benefit and peacefulness of heavenly beings and humans. And what are those matters? They are the 4 foundations of mindfulness, the 4 right efforts, the 4 bases of mental power, the 5 spiritual faculties, the 5 mental powers, the 7 factors of enlightenment, the noble eightfold path. And now, monks, I declare to you, all conditioned things are of a nature to decay, strive on untiringly. The Tathagata's final passing will not be long delayed. 3 months from now, the Tathagata will take his final nibbana, final enlightenment. Ripe I am in years, my lifespan's determined. Now I go from you, having made myself my refuge. Monks, be untiring, mindful, disciplined, guarding your minds with well-collected thought. He who tirelessly keeps to the guidance and teachings, leaving birth behind, will put an end to sorrow and despair.
Okay, thank you, sir. So here, the Buddha is essentially preparing for death. He knew he was going to die 3 months before. This is how enlightened he was, that part of a quality of an enlightened mind is you can oftentimes know things in the future that are going to happen before they happen. This isn't something that you go around, showing off to people. If you were showing this off, then you're not enlightened. There's boastfulness, there's arrogance and pride there. But one of the things that an enlightened being has the ability to do is be able to oftentimes know the future before it's actually occurred. So the Buddha knew that he was going to die 3 months before, and he was informing his students that he's going to die in 3 months. And this is actually very wise of him, because if any of his students were attached to him, it would allow them time to kind of slowly let that go. And there's another discourse that is essentially the same thing in this book series that is sharing more of this. And what you see is that there were some students who were attached to the Buddha. And when he delivered this discourse, they started talking to him and pleading with him not to die. In fact, Ananda, he wasn't enlightened yet. And Ananda, one of his closest students, were pleading and begging with him to not die. So this was very wise of him to give a heads up to his students that he was going to die in 3 months. And he knew that that was going to occur. And then what he shares with them is, okay, these are the things that you need to learn and practice in order to get to enlightenment. These are what the Buddha considered to be the core central teachings to be able to get to enlightenment. The 4 foundations of mindfulness, the 4 right efforts, the 4 bases of mental power, the 5 spiritual faculties, the 5 mental powers, the 7 factors of enlightenment, and the Eightfold Path. There's other teachings as well, but these are like what the Buddha considered the core central teachings. And there's other chapters in the book where I detail what these are and explaining them for you guys. And a lot of these are actually learned in the foundational programs that I teach, where I go through and I teach all these different things. But these are the core central teachings. He's saying, okay, stick close to those things. Those are the things that are going to lead you to enlightenment. And then he says, okay, and now, monks, I declare to you, all conditioned things are a nature to decay. So he's talking about his own body, that, okay, he's the Buddha, he's a Tathagata. The word Tathagata is how he referred to himself. This means like the one who's discovered the truth, or the one who shares the truth. This is what the word Tathagata means. But even a Tathagata, even a Buddha, they're impermanent. They arise, they change, and they fade away. And he's reminding people like, hey, this body is impermanent. It's all conditioned things are in nature to decay, that there's going to be this impermanence that I experience. I'm going to die in 3 months from now. But he says, strive on untiringly, because it's the teachings that are going to lead to one's enlightenment. He says that it won't be long, 3 months from now, that he will take his final nibbana. So when someone attains enlightenment and then there's death, we don't actually call it death. We call it final enlightenment or final nibbana. That if your mind is unenlightened, you're experiencing death, because you're experiencing death and birth, death and birth, death and birth over and over and over again. But by the time you get to enlightenment, what you're actually experiencing is just the breakup of the body and the mind. The body and the mind separate by the time you're enlightened, because you can get to enlightenment in this life where you've eliminated all craving and all clinging, and you will have eliminated all painful feelings in the mind. You will have eliminated all discontentedness. But even in this life, when you're enlightened, you're still going to experience physical pain. But you're going to experience physical pain very differently in the enlightened state than you would in the unenlightened state. In the unenlightened state, you're going to experience the physical pain, but you're also going to experience the mental anguish that goes along with that. Like if you stump your toe, you'll feel the physical pain in the unenlightened state, but then you're also going to have this mental anguish where you're maybe cussing and angry and blaming people, and it actually intensifies the physical pain. But by the time you get to enlightenment, you don't experience the physical pain and the mental pain. You only experience the physical pain. The mental anguish is gone. You'll stump your toe and you'll feel it, but it'll be muted. It won't be significant the way it was during the unenlightened state, because that mental anguish is heightening the physical pain. So in that enlightened mental state, you're still experiencing that physical pain because the mind and the body are still together. There's that one craving, or not a craving, but there's that one clinging that the mind can't eliminate as long as there's life. As long as you're alive, you can't eliminate that. But by the time you get to your last breath and the breakup of the body and the mind, then that last clinging has been completely eliminated, and you won't experience any physical pain from that point forward. So that's why we call it final enlightenment, because the last clinging has been completely eliminated. You've eliminated all the other stuff that's in the mind, but the mind itself is still connected to the body, and that's why you still experience physical pain. But again, it's very muted, and you actually need that physical pain. As an enlightened being, if you didn't experience physical pain, you would find yourself in all kinds of difficulties, because you could be close to like a fire, like maybe you're at a bonfire and your friend's throwing a backyard barbecue or something like this, and you're standing close to the fire. If you didn't feel that heat, your mind wouldn't know that you're too close to the fire, and now your body would start to burn and shrivel up, and it would be destroyed from the fire. So you need to have that little sensation of pain to be like, oh, okay, let me move the body. You can make wise decisions. So the physical pain in the body is an indication to the mind, hey, something is wrong here. Take action. Fix this. So if you're sitting in meditation and you notice that your knee is hurting, or your hip is hurting, or your back is hurting, you shouldn't breathe through the pain. That would be actually unwise. Instead, that pain is there telling the mind like, hey, something's wrong here. You should take action to fix this. So you're going to experience physical pain in the enlightened mental state, but it's going to be very minimal, very muted compared to what you once experienced, because you're not experiencing the mental anguish that you once experienced. So that's why we call it final enlightenment. So the Buddha is essentially encouraging his students to continue to practice the teachings, that's what's going to lead to their enlightenment, and striving to continue to do this. A Buddha is pointing the way to enlightenment, but they're not giving you enlightenment. So his students didn't need him to exist. He can't exist permanently, but the students didn't need him anymore. He had shared the teachings that he needed, and he left those teachings, and then he experienced this final enlightenment. So an individual who gets to enlightenment, they now are no longer going to be experiencing continuous rebirth. And here, in the case of the Buddha, he's going to encourage his students to keep learning and keep growing on the path, because that's what's going to lead to their liberation. And one of the things that he talks about, I think up here at the top, where, he talks about the teachings enduring for a long time. That's how you ensure that your teachings as a Buddha are going to endure for a long time or last for a long time, is that each individual student, having cultivated wisdom, they won't forget that wisdom that they cultivated to get to enlightenment. So by the time a Buddha dies, there would be countless people who have gotten to enlightenment, and the wisdom would be very deep and very profound in the world. The teachings would be shining very bright and very vibrantly by the time a Buddha dies, that people would clearly know what it takes to get to enlightenment. And then they would have preserved their teachings in such a way that countless more people can get to enlightenment. So the Buddha here is giving guidance about how to ensure that his teachings continue in the world long after his death. And here we are 2,500 years later, they're continuing to exist in the world because they've been preserved throughout all this time. Any questions on this chapter? Yes, ma'am.
Just to check, you said
I think it's not on yet.
Just to check, he said that at the stage when you then get to the final nibbana, there's a separation between body and mind. I was just a bit confused, because to me that sounds like the mind continues to exist, and I was just wondering how that squares with the Buddha's teaching of the no self.
Sure. So there's two different situations. One is if you're unenlightened and there's death, then this body and this mind, it's still going to separate. The body is impermanent, but also the mind is impermanent too. That now, because of craving in that old mind, it's going to create the spark that then produces this new mind. It's a new consciousness. So even though we call it the cycle of rebirth, nothing's actually being reborn. It's actually a new consciousness and a new body every single time. But the craving and the residual memories from this old mind are going to go into this new mind. And now you've got this new mind with craving and clinging and the residual memories from the previous life. So it's a completely new mind and a new body, a new individual being. The non-self, the universal truth of non-self, is explaining that this body nor this mind is you. It's not who you are. So the Buddha didn't teach that there's like a soul or a spirit that goes from one life to the next, because that would be opposite of the universal truth of impermanence. He left this as an undeclared teaching. When you look at his teachings, there's a certain discourse where he says, remember my teachings, monks, I taught this. And also, remember what I did not teach. I didn't teach these things. And he leaves the teaching about whether there is a soul or there isn't a soul. He leaves it as an undeclared teaching. He just doesn't declare whether that's true or false, that there is a soul, there isn't one. And then also, once somebody gets to enlightenment, and then there's this breakup of the body and death to get to final enlightenment, he doesn't say what's next, if anything at all. He leaves that as an undeclared teaching. And he does this wisely because, in my opinion, if there is something next, and he described what that is, that's just one more thing for the mind to crave and one more thing for the mind to let go of. If there isn't something next, then okay, so what? Your mind's so peaceful and so joyful in the enlightened mental state, you've eliminated all fear, even the fear of death. If you die in the enlightened mental state, okay, so what? If there's nothing next, who cares? But he may or may not have known if there is something next, because oftentimes what you're going to find in the Buddha's teachings, or pretty much everywhere, is that he only teaches what he's experienced. through his own direct experience. If he experienced it, he will teach it because he knows that it's true. But if he hasn't experienced something, he doesn't teach it because, yes, his mind has the ability to know something even having not experienced it. Like he knows he's going to die 3 months in advance. So he knows this is going to happen, but he hasn't experienced it yet. So a Buddha, an enlightened being, has the ability to know something before it's happened. But in the situation of what's going to happen after death for an enlightened being, he may not have known what is next, or he may have known and he just didn't experience it yet. So he left it as an undeclared teaching. Or perhaps it's something that he knew that, okay, this is just one more thing for them to crave, so I'm not even going to teach them what comes next. Because if you can get to enlightenment, that's the ultimate goal. What's going to happen after enlightenment? Okay, you'll find out when you get there. Just enjoy that peace and that joy for the rest of your life, in this life. So these are undeclared teachings. Yeah. Anything else you guys would like to talk about, or any questions you guys have? Yes, sir. The mic's on.
Can you scroll down towards the end?
Sure.
The question I have is on the word, and I've been thinking this, the word, can you like elaborate on the word refuge or refugee, or like, because I've heard things like I take shelter, I take refuge in the Buddha, I take refuge in the Dharma, I take refuge in the Sangha.
Yeah.
So refuge in particular.
Sure. The word refuge, what it refers to is protection. That if you have a refuge, that it's going to provide you some amount of protection. And normally the way people think about a refuge is like, I'm going to go to this mountain retreat or this mountain cabin, and that's going to be my refuge. Or I'm going to have this refuge in the forest or something like this, right? Well, the Buddha teaches that none of those things are like a true refuge. They're not really going to protect you because it's just a building, and that building is impermanent, and it can't protect you from your own discontentedness. It can't protect you from your own thoughts. So he refers to his teachings in the community as the true refuge, because this is the true protection. That if you have confidence in the Buddha, you have access to his teachings, and you're part of a community that is supporting you and encouraging you to enlightenment, that once you get to enlightenment, that's the true refuge. That's the true protection, where your mind's fully protected and it won't experience discontentedness anymore. So he's describing here that he is his own refuge, meaning that he's fully trained his mind, he's protected his mind, that there's nothing that's going to shake him up, that his mind's fully protected. So you can get to that same mental state where your mind is fully protected. You're going to need guidance, you're going to need help, because a Buddha can do it by themselves. That's why he said, I am my own refuge, I am my own protection. Nobody else guided him to this mental state of enlightenment. He figured out how to do it himself. But for you, you'll need guidance. But once you get to that enlightened mental state, your mind will be fully protected. Your mind is in this refuge. And in order to get to that refuge, you need to find refuge in the Buddha, meaning ultimately gaining confidence in him. You need to have refuge in his teachings, gaining access to them and seeing that they're true. And then you'll need to gain refuge from the community, where you're in this community now, you're learning, you're encouraged, you're motivated, you're supported to be able to get to this mental state where your mind can be protected. Mm-hmm.
Could you also see, sorry, like a follow-up kind of thing that I had a moment earlier when we were meditating. Mm-hmm. Could you also see like the breath as kind of a refuge, like, because it's constantly like letting go and coming back to the breath, like the present moment is like a big key to, like, you know, eliminating like the monkey mind and the discontentedness. So could the breath kind of be seen as a refuge? That's because it's always there, like you don't have to go anywhere to breathe.
The breath is impermanent. It's impermanent, so it's not going to be that permanent refuge of the enlightened mind. The way that I see the breath is I view it as the present moment, because that's right now. So when you're bringing the mind back to the breath, you're bringing it back to the present moment, because in meditation, your mind's going to want to be in the past or the future. So when you're bringing it back to the breath, you're bringing it to the present moment. Eventually, you'll get to the point where it just always resides in the present moment. But in the meantime, you use that breath as the anchor point. So when we're talking about a refuge, we're talking about that permanent protection. How is the mind going to be permanently protected from all this discontentedness where it won't be shaken up anymore whatsoever? And you need to bring the mind into the present moment with the breath to be able to do that. But the breath itself isn't the protection. It's the mental state of enlightenment is the ultimate protection, the ultimate refuge.
The refuge is a permanent thing.
Yes. That's why like retreating to the mountain in the forest or in a cabin, that's not a true refuge, because you're still sitting in that cabin with your own thoughts, and you can still experience painful feelings while you're sitting in that cabin. Your mind's not fully protected. You might be protected from robbers or, criminals or something like that if you're like really far remote. But even they can probably come visit you there, right? But your own thoughts, they're going to follow you around. So that's why like some people, like we might live in the US or Canada or the UK or something, and they come to Thailand and think like, oh, everything's going to be so peaceful in Thailand. But then when they get here, their life is just as difficult as it was when they were back in their home country, because their mind was following them around, right? So the way to get to the ultimate protection and ultimate refuge is to train your mind.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. Oh, yes, another question?
So the beginning of this today's lesson, so kind of show the calmness. I forgot the word, nice word, but to show the calmness. And then you mentioned, so if something wrong idea come up, and then we should try to cut it off, so eliminate. And then, so let's say, for example, so someone airing me, and I feel like, oh, this guy really annoying me. Then, so try to cut off, and then so get back myself, kind of calmness or coolness. Then, so continue the conversation, or just if I don't want to keep conversation, I could just stop talking to him. I'm not sure. So this kind of question is a really proper one or not. But so yeah, sometimes my feeling. Oh, so I don't like to talk so much with this guy. Is because so kind of earring and then shout out sometimes. So and then but so according to Buddha's teaching, maybe I should cut it off, and then so get myself like being calm would be good idea. What do you say? So when I encounter the kind of situation.
Okay. So in a situation where you're in a conversation and you're noticing annoyment starting to arise in the mind, anytime you notice any discontentedness, no matter what you're doing, where you're at, you're just sitting in a park somewhere and you notice discontentedness coming up, you should be working to cut that off and let it go. And we say cut it off and let it go, but early in practice, it's not so easy to cut these things off and let them go because your mind's not very well trained. It sounds to be like it's so easy because we just say cut it off and let it go. But in reality, you're cutting it off and cutting it off and cutting it off and cutting it off. And it's really challenging to let it go. And part of what you're doing is sometimes redirecting the mind and taking it in a different direction. It's kind of like a wild bush growing, and you got to cut it back and cut it back and cut it back and cut it back and cut it back, and eventually you uproot this thing. So as you're meditating, you're getting more and more ability to cut it off and let it go, that ultimately you can get to the point where boom, you can cut things off and let them go. And this is where you're really close to enlightenment. But in reality, it's going to take you a lot of time to build up to that. So no matter what you're doing, if you notice any discontentedness, any of those feelings that I mentioned, the conditioned pleasant feelings, painful feelings are neither painful nor pleasant, because those conditioned pleasant feelings are temporary. They're unsatisfying. What you would like to do is get to the permanent joy, the permanent happiness. So if you keep allowing the conditional feelings to come in, you're going to continue to experience the painful feelings. So letting go of those conditional pleasant feelings is a real key to eliminating the painful feelings. So cutting those off and letting them go. So in a situation where you're noticing annoyance coming up and you're in a conversation with someone, this is where your mindfulness needs to be very well developed. You need to pay attention to your mind and be aware of it, because if you're so agitated that you're about to say something or do something that would be really unwise, probably the best thing to do is for you to break contact and maybe walk away from the situation, realizing that it's not the other person who's causing you to be annoyed. It's your cravings, desires, attachments that are causing you to be annoyed. That's causing the mind to be annoyed. But sitting in that conversation and allowing the mind to continue to be frustrated and annoyed, you might do something that's very unwise. So sometimes it makes sense to break contact and walk away. Other times, depending on where you are in your training, you might just be kind of like a little bit annoyed, a little bit agitated, but you would like to do what I was talking about with Christopher, which is you'd like to put your mind in the situation that it's annoyed with in order to train it to let go of this craving. Whereas if you just always broke contact and walked away, your mind's not going to eliminate that craving. You're sometimes going to need to put the mind in the situation. So this is where your mindfulness needs to kick in and be aware, like, am I going to do something that's so unwise here? I'm going to regret it later and it's going to produce unwholesome karma. In that situation, walk away. Protect your six sense bases. This is guarding the mind, ensuring that you're not going to produce unwholesome karma by making unwise decisions. But it could be a situation where you're just a little bit annoyed. You're just a little bit agitated and you're getting more benefit from just sitting there and listening to the person and smiling and realizing like, oh boy, I got to cut off that annoyment. I got to let it go. I got to get rid of this craving, desire, attachment. And you might just be sitting there using this opportunity as an experience to be able to cut that off and let it go. So it's your mindfulness that's going to help you determine what's the wisest decision. Should I leave or should I stay in this situation?
Yeah.
It's on.
Thanks so much. Yes. So as you mentioned, so sometimes, I just, I could stop the conversation, but so I have maybe, so the guy might me to respect him. So maybe I should be here. So yeah, kind of training. So yeah, it's really so depend on the condition. So
yeah,
yes,
that's why your mind needs to be in the present moment.
Okay.
Because if your mind's in the past or in the future, your mind's not going to be able to make that wise decision in the present moment. By bringing your mind in the present moment and practicing mindfulness, you'll be able to make the wise decision. And it's not always wise to walk away, but it's not always wise to stay in the conversation either. So that's where you need to make a unique decision each time. And that's why the Buddha doesn't give you this decision tree that if you're annoyed, always do this. That would be like a permanent decision, right? Of course, you're always going to cut it off and let it go. That's what you're working to do. And you might find that it's easier to do that if you walk away. And you might find that it's easier to do that while you're staying in the conversation. You need to decide based on the condition of your mind. And that's where having fully developed the 4 foundations of mindfulness will help you to do that.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks so much. Yeah, I should be really flexible. Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. All right. I'm not seeing any other questions anywhere. So, Siddharth, you have a question.
I have a question about grasping of the consciousness aggregate. Like, how does one verify that this is happening and let it go?
Okay. So the 5 aggregates of form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness. If you're grasping and clinging to the consciousness, then that fetter of personal existence view is going to be there, where you're clinging to your self-identity, the things that are going on in the mind. You're going to be clinging to your various thoughts and certain opinions and certain views that you have. So if you're in a conversation and somebody says something that's opposite of your opinion or your view, you'll advocate. You'll try to persuade that person that you're right and they're wrong. So those are some of the symptoms that you'll see if you're clinging to the consciousness, is you'll be clinging to certain opinions and views and thoughts. You'll be clinging to the identity and these kinds of things. The things that are going, it's not just the mind itself, but it's the things that are going on inside the mind. This is how the mind clings to the consciousness. And also, if you're clinging to life itself, like if you're clinging to existence, this is the mind clinging to the physical form or clinging to the mind wanting to exist in the world. This is part of clinging to the consciousness. So by the time you've eliminated that, then if you're in a conversation with somebody and their view or opinion is different than yours, you're not going to feel like this urge to share with them what you think about that. Or if you're sharing something about what you think and they disagree with you, you're not going to feel this urge to convince them about what it is that you are thinking at that particular moment.
Some of these things, at least I perceive them as part of the perception.
That's true.
So like how does the distinction happen between perception and consciousness? So for example, at least I think of consciousness as the awareness, the subjective awareness.
Yeah, consciousness is the mind itself, and there's certain thoughts, certain thinking that the mind has that aren't perceptions, right? So there is the perception aggregate that the mind can cling to that as well. But if they're clinging to the perception aggregate, you're also clinging to the consciousness as well. So you need to be able to eliminate both of these in order to fully eliminate any clinging to the five aggregates. So when we talk about personal existence view, this is a way to think about clinging to the consciousness directly, that if there's identity in the mind, this is part of the consciousness. But you could also think of it as part of a perception, that the mind has a certain perception about the world and about the mind and about the body. So you need to eliminate the clinging to all of those things.
Okay. Would you say awareness is also like a clinging that you would eliminate, like clinging to the awareness itself?
You need to eliminate any and all clinging, but you need to practice awareness. You need to practice having awareness of the mind, but you're not clinging to it. So as you're making your way to the point where you have fully developed mindfulness, where you're always aware of the mind, there's going to be situations where you have awareness of the mind and certain situations where you don't have awareness of your mind as you're making your way to full awareness of the mind. So if you are clinging to awareness, then when your mind isn't aware, you're going to be frustrated, right? So it's a matter of understanding these qualities that you're building and that you're working to build and you're working to develop, but you're not clinging to any of these particular qualities that you're building, like what we were talking about with equanimity today. The same thing is you're not interested in clinging to your mindfulness or your awareness of mind, that you're developing it, you're cultivating, you know you need to have that fully developed and practicing it all the time, but you're not holding on to it and clinging to it. Do you understand the difference between having something or practicing something versus not clinging to it?
Not clinging to it is like not grasping, and having something is just the presence of it.
Yeah, you're just aware that it exists. That I'm working towards this awareness of mind, and I would like to have this mindfulness, and you make decisions to work in that direction. But when you have this awareness and you realize it's there, you're not clinging to it and holding on to it, craving it to be permanent. So awareness is something that the mind can cling to, but you're not interested in allowing it to cling to that awareness.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, it sounds like everything that you guys have questions about have been answered today, so thank you all for joining. If this is your first time here, you're welcome to attend and invited to attend our other classes and courses and retreats. We teach classes here on Sunday, Wednesday, and Saturday. On Sunday and Wednesday is our group learning program, which is more of a foundational program that you guys are welcome to join. This is where we go chapter by chapter each Sunday in volume 1. Tomorrow we're going to be in chapter 14, which is titled Cultivating Healthy Mental States, Loving Kindness, Compassion, Sympathetic Joy, and Equanimity. I'm going to explain to you what these 4 things are and the certain remedies that this fixes in the mind. I'm going to explain to you certain symptoms that you'll experience if you're not practicing these 4 healthy mental states. So I'll explain to you what the healthy mental states are, what the remedies are, how these are helping the mind in a positive way. And then I'm going to explain to you how to cultivate them and how to produce them in the mind. So this will be tomorrow starting at 9 a.m. and we'll start with meditation. And then on Wednesday, what we're going to be doing is breathing mindfulness meditation. And then I'll open up to any and all questions you guys have, or I won't actually have any particular topic that I'm going to be teaching. It'll just be random questions from the community of anything you guys would like to ask questions about. And then, of course, we have various courses and retreats throughout the month, throughout the year that you guys are welcome to join as well. So thank you all for joining for today. We'll see you guys in a future class. Have a wonderful and lovely rest of your day. Sawadee khap. Sawadee khap.
Thank you again for watching. Enjoy your meditation. Look forward to seeing you online and answering any questions that you might have. Thank you so much.